Hello and welcome to the second episode of. Why did I say that weirdly? I said that. I don't remember. Never mind. The second episode of the What I'm Playing podcast. Uh, this is obviously a podcast where I'm basically talking about, obviously, as it says in the title, what I'm playing, but also covering any other sort of topics in games. Anything that's kind of come up. Obviously, one thing I should sort of say, which I sort of said in the first episode, is that the name isn't necessarily final. It's kind of more it's more of a name proper than like the Untitled Destiny podcast, which is like the other weekly podcast I've got going on. Um and yeah, but that's something I'll figure out in time sort of thing. But the main thing is the content itself, the actual discussions and the podcast itself. And so yeah, while I say I'm sort of talking about games, as I will do in this episode, there'll be a little bit else that's kind of branching off from games. It's not just all about games, but I think games will basically be like 90% of it. I think 90% is even too low. I think it probably will be like 95, close to 100, almost 100%. I don't really see myself branching out too much beyond games, but we'll see how it goes and where things take us. So yeah, as I said, this is obviously the second episode. So the first episode I spoke about, or came out 2 weeks ago, and we spoke about a bunch of things. I think it was like the Red Dead Redemption remaster. I spent a while talking about the Microsoft-Activision acquisition, which I will also be talking about today, but hopefully to a lesser degree. Final Fantasy 16 also took up a bulk of the games. Well, I spoke about a lot of games of what I was playing because that first episode was kind of intended to be like, it's the first episode. Let me kind of give you an idea of what I've been playing across the last month or two. Um, and what I'm about to lead into is that last week I posted the first episode of What I'm Playing Plus, which is basically like a spin-off series of this main show where I can kind of go deeper on certain topics and talk about certain games. And again, it's still very early days and don't know where it's going to take me and what I'll cover there, but obviously that'll kind of be like the bonus sort of set of episodes there, and that kind of expanded more of what I'm playing this year because I covered my favourite backlog games of 2023, and so you can go and check that out. I'm hoping to have, because what happened was I ended up, originally that was meant to be two topics in one, which is both my favourite backlog games that I've played this year, as well as my favourite like games that have, released this year, new releases this year. And what ended up happening was I spent ages talking about the first two or three games. So I was just like, you know what? I'm going to make this one episode. I'm going to make this other one second episode so I don't feel like I'm rushing through games, to let it flow better, essentially. And so hopefully, either this week or sometime next week, my plan, ideally in terms of a schedule, it'll be this Friday. But I want to make sure I can finish Final Fantasy 16 kind of first, just to kind of, make sure I have flying bait, because I'm where I'm up to in the game, as I'll get into later. I'm 94% complete, so it's like I basically should be able to finish it for, I don't know, in the next 2 or 3 days, hopefully, and then yeah, have time to record it and post it on Friday. But if not, it'll probably be next week sometime. But that's also because the schedule. I'm also trying to work out all of this. And speaking of that, I have sort of been rethinking the schedule. Compared to what I originally set out, kind of thing. Because ultimately, like, what I've been trying to figure out is just having, like, my main focus is just have these weekly podcast episodes, and I'm trying to figure out a way that I can kind of consistently cover games, both what I'm playing and what's in the news, without kind of like putting too much pressure on, like, oh, I've got to, because like this is something that's like a larger discussion that I'm at the moment. I don't know. Again, this is all up in the air. But I did start writing a kind of an update post to kind of give like a full deep dive into this entire thing. I was considering, oh, maybe I'll make like a video kind of alongside it, or I'll do like a almost like or maybe a podcast discussion to kind of go, to kind of complement it or whatever. But it also might be a case where I just kind of roll off a few things, like here or at least at the beginning of one of the episodes. So I'm not sure when that article will go out, sort of thing, but that's something I'm sort of working on, or I started working on last week. Wrote a bunch of it, and it is basically just a rambling piece, but there are a lot of like interesting, I think, viewpoints and discussions I think I've got going on in there because it covers a lot of the last few years of what I've been doing, and it kind of covers what I want to do now and where I'm sort of like, where things are headed and what I'm thinking about and how I want to sort of tackle things. But ultimately, um, I the schedule thing I've been trying to rethink, and the whole point of these podcasts is to kind of allow me to not feel like I have to constantly, not to say like I have to be constantly be working, but like what used to happen as I get into in this article was that I would spend most of my time writing articles the entire week, and I would kind of, whether I'll procrastinate or I wouldn't, or I would go, I'd write like a really extensive article, or suddenly something will come up in the news and that would suddenly take over. And it wasn't particularly organized, but because I was like aiming for one article a week, because typically I find that my articles are a little bit more in depth and stuff like that, um, I just wasn't very good at managing time and keeping to a schedule. I was good at keeping to a schedule of posting every Friday, I think it was, but it it kind of felt like as soon as I finished one thing, it was like straight into the next and into the next, and it felt never ending. And that is kind of how the games industry and things are, but it felt almost unsustainable because it what happened was that I wasn't the motivation wasn't always there, and then I was like not feeling like it, and then I was kind of like, yeah, that's when I procrastinated. And then what happens is that I would sometimes be working up until like 9, 10 o'clock and be like, oh right, I need food, and then I would go and get food, and then it would be like 10 or 11 o'clock, and then I'd be like, oh, now I'm tired and I want to play games, and then maybe I'd stay up too late, and then I would get up late the next day, and it'd almost be this cycle kind of thing. Um, and obviously, as I also get into in this article, that obviously in the last sort of well, the last couple of years, but more consistently as of sort of late last year or the second half of last year, I've been doing sort of freelance work for Eurogamer, and so which has been really awesome. Um, so it's also trying to find something that can kind of work around all of this, that lets me kind of have more time myself to actually do the things, to then be able to talk about them. And you know, it might seem, I mean, it's weird though, because I might say, oh, it might seem like this is low effort, these podcasts, but the interesting thing is that like I write, like I haven't, not that I've written it as like a proper article, but this entire show I've structured, written, I've gotten the news, I've sourced things, I've quoted things, and and I've got it all written down in bullet points, and I go through and then like bold it and kind of edit it slightly. And so I like looking at it right now, this document is just over 5,000 words, and the Destiny podcast I did the other day, I think, was about 6,000 words. And that, I mean, which that was because that was a lot of quotes in that Destiny one. There's less quotes here. More of this one is sort of my writing, but it's kind of like that's like I'm basically writing almost an article's worth, or more than an article's worth here, you know. And so yeah, essentially, I'm trying to kind of figure out something that's relatively simple, quick, lets me stick to a schedule, and who knows if this works. Like I'm saying all this, but like this is all just assuming it works. Um, and I'll go much deeper into everything and kind of like my sort of a better sort of insight into how I've been thinking about things, uh, and how I thought about what I was doing in the past and all stuff like that. That'll go and discuss more in the article whenever I get to sort of finishing that, which will hopefully be soon. I'll probably carry on writing that tomorrow, I think, or I might just focus on Final Fantasy tomorrow to get that done, so I can focus on the other episode. And it's like it's a constant thing of trying to keep moving essentially, but. Yeah, it might seem low effort, but I'm basically, like I say, I'm writing these articles. I'm writing these notes for this show, and I'm structuring it. And yeah, so that's kind of what I mean though. It's like just kind of getting to a place where it's like I can hit like every week, I can have a podcast at minimum. And the nice thing about the podcast is, sure, like they require sourcing and finding news and all stuff like that, but it's in notes. I'm not terribly concerned about writing it like super well, because it's only me looking at it and reading from sort of notes, or at least reading, you know, general points. I do need to get better at kind of like writing these notes so I can kind of just more free flow talk without having to like follow a whole structure as specific and sort of intricate as this goes. But that's also just me and my inability to write things in short sentences sometimes, which is why I then go through and I like bold certain like phrases and sentences, so that I sort of can easily jump between those, so I sort of get an idea. And that's usually what's happening, is whilst I'm talking, I'm like reading and I'm looking at this like structure to kind of know where I'm going to go next. But yeah, the nice thing about this podcast is that it will allow me to cover multiple things at once. And my thought process, it's like, hey, if I don't play much in a week, it doesn't matter, because hopefully there'll be some news to talk about. And if there's literally nothing to talk about, then maybe I can just say, oh, I won't do the show, or it'll just be super short. Um, and because it's every 2 weeks, is what I said before, it gives me time to then be like, okay, so for like Destiny, I'm not playing much Destiny in the last few months at this rate. Um, but there's usually some news to talk about or something in the game, and so I can, and since I know the game pretty well, I don't have to constantly play it to kind of be in the know fully, and I follow the community quite closely. Um, so I've been playing a lot more games, I think, this year, and I think even last year I was kind of pretty good as well. um, and in a similar way for the games podcast, it's like I can kind of take my time, play what I want. Doesn't matter if I finish it or I don't have to finish a game for this next show. As long as I'm kind of staying in the ecosystem of games, and even if it's not games, like if I'm watching something, it lets me kind of keep moving, and it's every 2 weeks, which may seem not very, it's like a long time, but it gives you a lot of time to kind of like, it doesn't make me feel like I'm constantly like, never stopping. And because the podcast I'm writing is not going out live, I'm not too concerned about how it's written, so I'm spending less time there. And so what's happening is that I'm putting out something that, I mean, like the Destiny episode the other day was like 11 minutes, and sorry, 11 minutes, sorry, that's me reading the current time, ignore what I'm saying. It was about an hour and 45 minutes, which was way longer than I thought it would be. And much like that episode last week, the one I'm playing plus, that ended up being just over an hour, I think, and that was again longer than I had intended. But I was kind of fine with it because like that's sort of what I want to go for anyway. And I feel like you get a good amount of stuff in there. There's a lot of a lot of discussions. Like I know for now I've been rambling for like nearly like 10 minutes or so on this particular topic, but you can use the timestamp so people that don't want to listen to this can just kind of like skip past this. And this is obviously just me going through generally, how things, how I'm sort of thinking about things. And so, yeah, short the long is that these podcasts are, sure, they're every 2 weeks. That schedule could change, who knows, it depends on how it all sort of pans out. But the whole intent is that I can kind of relax a little bit more, gives me time for any freelance work I get, gives me time to kind of think. And if I do want to write articles or if I do want to make a video or something like that, it gives me time to focus on that. Whilst I'm also hopefully found a format that I can keep, like for me to have like a format that's like I can have this like once a week, and I'm not always talking about the same things, and I'm not constrained to, because the thing is, if you think about all of the topics that I'm going to discuss in this episode and the last episode, many of these, like, sure, I could write an article like this and I could post that, but one, I mean, I don't know how many people are actually going to read that, but two, I don't want to write all of this. Like, this feels so much better, honestly, just to me, to kind of, like, discuss and to talk about all these topics. But, even if you take, like, let's just take, like, I've got, listed here, I've got 4, like, main news topics, and I've got 2 games I'll be talking about, and you'll, like, if I was to write about all those, that's like what, maybe 6 articles. You could condense them into like 3 or 4, like, combining certain things, but I don't know if you would get the same, it wouldn't be the same. Yeah, right. And then what would happen is that, as I explained in this article, which I keep referring to, this article which isn't out yet, as I said, hopefully soon, I would I would struggle to kind of, either if I didn't write much, it didn't feel worth it, and it felt like, oh, I should just tweet it. But then if I was tweeting it, I was like, well, if it's multiple tweets, I might as well make an article out of it. And it's not easy for me to just kind of like post a quick article and go. Not because it's not easy inherently, but more because it's like I end up like spending way longer than I should, because I'm like, oh, let me make a header, let me like get this ready, and then like with how I'm doing now, I'm like, oh wait, maybe I should have like an audio version as well, and it's like, and that's just for one article. Yeah, I could just write all of this in notes and talk about it on a show, and kind of rest being like, oh cool, I've spoken about that now. I've in a significant capacity, and so yeah, I am totally rambling now, I know, but like that's kind of what I'm thinking. So yeah, in terms of the schedule though, as I said, my main focus is sticking to these weekly podcasts. So the Untitled Destiny podcast and this What I'm Playing podcast. And obviously we've got like the Untitled Destiny podcast extra, which I'm thinking I'm going to kind of pull back on a little bit. Like what I'm thinking of is, if I'm going to reduce focus anywhere, it'll be on the Destiny side, because I want to. This show is the kind of the main one that I wanted to do, but I was just kind of like, I was like, but do I want to do this every week? Like that again, like is that going to force me into this cycle of constantly covering news, and I just wanted to kind of take it slow first, kind of get used to how it all feels, and then maybe I'll pick up the pace as I get used to it and as I get better. And I think I've noticed, like, even in these few episodes, I think I have gotten better at just kind of free flow talking, not really worrying too much about time, which maybe is a bad thing to some people, but it's like, I don't know, like, there's timestamps. That's how I always think about things. It's like, some people might want to listen to all this, I don't know. But it's like, if you don't want to, and you just want to hear my thoughts on different things, you can just jump through with the timestamps. And yeah, so that's my thought process there. So yeah, a bit of an example, by the way, on like my sort of schedule is that, when I say about changing the schedule, or at least, trying to rework it, last week's Destiny podcast got published on this Tuesday, and that was because my original plan was that I was going to get up on Mondays, I was going to plan the episode, I was going to write it all, I was going to source everything, quote everything, and then I was going to record it, and then edit it, export it, publish it, thumbnail, everything. And I realized that was probably a bit too much to try and do in one day. And so, to contrast, I'm recording this episode currently sort of midday on Monday, and I started planning it kind of around late last week, and then yesterday I was kind of writing a bunch of this, and then this morning I've just kind of gone in, added a bit more, got a few more things, and just kind of finished it off, gone through, bolded those certain phrases and texts as I do, and yeah, so that's where we're at now. Yeah, I think that's everything from that. Unless I've missed anything, but I think that's everything. Yes. Okay, so that's kind of my process right now. So for anyone that's, after that long discussion, I just want to be kind of like more like better planning and sort of more judicious with like those for the Untitled Destiny podcast extra and these What I'm Playing Plus episodes. And I think, as I said, if anything, I'll be reducing the focus on the Destiny side first. Plus, I don't know if I need those extra podcasts for Destiny kind of thing. That was kind of a spur of the moment thing anyway. It kind of came out of nowhere. And then in my mind, I was like, oh, I can do like a main podcast every Monday and then like a bonus episode on the Friday, and then we'll have it'll go like 2 Destiny episodes, 2 What I'm Playing episodes, 2 Destiny. And I'm like thinking that's probably not how I'm going to do it. Like last week, for example, you saw the What I'm Playing Plus go up at the end of the week. And then there'll probably be another one. If there's another one this week, then that's 2 weeks in a row. And that's kind of maybe what it is. I'd maybe rather it be like a 3-to-1, like 1 Destiny show, and then 1 main game show, and then 2 bonus episodes. But that's all up in the air. Who knows if that'll be the schedule. It also depends if there's anything to talk about, and again, it's like, the nice thing is that I know that if I don't do any of those bonus episodes, this weekly show is going to be like the main thing at least, and I can cover a bunch of stuff here. And to be fair, one thing I should have said this before, when I said that, like, oh, if there's nothing to talk about, I could probably, like, make up a topic, like, oh, okay, there's nothing to talk about, let's think of something, and if we get to a point where, people are writing in as well, which would be really cool, then we've got extra things to talk about there, and that will kind of formulate, and I've already got the structure for where I'm going to talk about those, and everything like that, so, yeah, but anyway, in terms of, and on that note, sorry, I should say, if you have any feedback or questions or comments or anything like that, be sure to kind of post them in the comments below. But yeah, I think that's everything. All of the PSAs and everything else. As I said, What I'm Playing Plus last week came out. Go check it out. Talking about my favorite backlog games of 2023 so far, and then either this week, this Friday, or next week. I'm hoping this week. That's my aim. I'll be talking about my favorite games of the year so far in terms of just new releases. So, and there's a lot to talk about there. And I think in my mind that'll be a longer episode than the backlog episode because I've got a lot more to say. I actually spent a while writing that section in notes. But yeah, that's it for the PSAs. Let's kind of, stretch our legs and get into some smaller news topics to talk about and talk about some new game releases that have just come out. So yeah, this first little news story here is basically when was it announced? It was back in, I think, May, right? PlayStation had the showcase, and alongside, was it their accessibility controller they showed it with, I think, or I think so. They basically announced that they were doing a handheld, but not a typical handheld, doing a streaming, like, remote play-based handheld, and they were calling it Project Q, and suddenly out of nowhere that there's been some videos and images that have basically leaked of that device, which apparently has an LCD touchscreen. I'm looking at Pushware's article here, Well, it's not. I've not really got too much to discuss. It's basically more of a thing to look at kind of thing. But it's interesting because like this, as I said, this is a remote play. It uses remote play on this sort of handheld, and then basically you would stream the games from your PS5 to this device. Um, and I mean, I'm curious to know if it is only PS5. I assume it is. I don't see why they would do it with PS4 as well. Um, and I don't know, like I'm kind of mixed on the idea because like this is something that I'm sort of curious about. Like I might look into it, and I don't hate the idea behind it. Um, but I just kind of like I just don't know how I feel about like the one thing I'll say is that like I've tried using remote play on my phone and in the same room as my PS5, and it's not been particularly great. So I kind of don't really know if like it's one of those where it's like I don't want to buy something that's just going to be like terrible, if you know what I mean. But what is interesting about this is its design and how it's put together, is because it has like the like the handles of like the DualSense controller, and so like it's almost like you're holding a DualSense controller, but instead of like the bit that kind of connects the two sides together, or the two the left and right sort of handles, there's the like the phone screen, or like this touch. It's apparently a touch screen as well. Um, and it's a bit of a weird design, but I actually quite like the way it looks, and I can imagine that it having quite a nice sort of weight to it. Nice sort of like use and hold, whatever. I think it's an interesting design, honestly, and I think it looks like it's a pretty simple thing to hold, and like it might look strange, but it's like I think that's just kind of just how it is, kind of thing. And obviously it will also, not only does it look like the DualSense controller, it's also gonna have certain like features from it, so like haptic feedback and adaptive triggers and stuff like that. And so I don't know. There's not too much to talk about here, but it's just that it's leaked. I don't know when this is actually coming out. Does it say? You probably hear me clicking here actually. I don't actually think it says when it's coming out. Did they say? Um, let's see. Yeah, and one thing Push Square actually does note here is as well is that they sort of they're saying they're confident that it will eventually work with PS Plus Premium as well, which makes sense. Um, and Yeah, see, I don't know if we know actually when this is going to be releasing, but I imagine, I feel like they did say like late this year or something, but I could be totally wrong on that. Um, but yeah, interesting. Honestly, I'm not sure if I'll look into it. I think it is meant to be only like less than £100, I think, which is still a fair amount, but not too bad. So I'm not too sure if it's something I'll look into, but I don't hate how it looks. I sort of like the design, and I think it's an interesting idea. I think I do wish that it was just like a normal portable device, and I miss the Vita. Honestly, I mean, not that everyone liked the Vita. I don't even know where my Vita is. I think I know where it is, but I just haven't used it in ages. But yeah, I do think about it from time to time. A lot of great games on there. Um, and it's a shame that a lot of those are locked away on the platform, honestly. Um, but yeah, as I said, I don't hate the design. I think it looks cool, and it'll be interesting to see how it sort of pans out and when it releases. It's interesting that it's already leaked. I don't know if this is like a dev test kit or whatever you call them. I don't know why I can't think of the dev kit. I think that's what they're called, right? Dev kits. Um, so yeah, we'll see. I imagine it won't be. There'll be some news soon. I mean, we've just had news about the accessibility controller coming out December 6th, 7th, or something like that. So it almost wouldn't surprise me if the Project Q is like not far behind, whether around the same time or maybe it's early next year. Who knows? We'll get into. I probably should have. Now I think about it. I probably should have like coupled this in with that, but we'll get into some more PlayStation related hardware leaks a bit later on as well. But for now, I've got a few more sort of things to talk about on these small news topics. This is a bit of a random one. High on Life just suddenly is out on PS4 and PS5. For some reason, like just out of nowhere. Um, I wrote here that it's released on a Sunday morning, and actually was like, I mean, at least in my time, in the UK, it was like when I saw it, it was like 3 in the morning. But I think it was announced just after midnight here. But it's still really weird. If you go on the store, it says it was released on the 23rd of July, which is obviously the Sunday. Don't know if that differs between regions. I actually did think about that. I'm wondering if that's different between regions. But I would imagine in America it probably says 22nd or something. But that's weird. You would have thought it would have like all the same dates. But anyway, this was actually rumored or something on the back end a few days ago, apparently, that suggested that the game was coming, but then it was just kind of a shadow drop, really. Uh, and yeah, I checked the store, so when I sort of saw a tweet about it, and there it was. And I think one thing that's weird to me is it costs £50, which I'm not particularly sure about. It seems a bit steep. Like, I know that's like fair for like a new game, but I'm like, it's already been on Xbox, it's on Game Pass. I don't know if that's just trying to capitalize on people buying it, but I don't know if it was really a smart idea to put it at 50. I feel like if you had gone for 25 to 30, I think more people might be interested in buying it. I'm certainly not going to buy it, I don't think, until it's cheaper. Because I mean, I played it on Game Pass. Before I didn't play too much of it. But that's the thing. Like it's on Game Pass, so I'm almost like, well, maybe I don't need to buy it. But I also, it's only if there's trophies. If there's no trophies, I don't care. I'll play it on Xbox. um, but yeah, I think this was revealed at, I assume, San Diego Comic Con because as an IGN tweet, I saw says here that the game will be getting a DLC titled High on Knife. That releases later this year as well, and obviously I assume that will come to all platforms: PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. I think it's on PC. Um, but yeah, I've not got too much to say on this. I thought it was an interesting game, kind of funny. I remember watching, I mentioned, I think, King Cathalion on the previous episode, but he was playing this, and there was just, I remember him watching like a TV, there's just like a bunch of like adverts and like cartoons on it, and it was just, it was hilarious, and I think it was more funny watching him play it than it was like actually playing it myself. Um, but it is a very weird game, and there's a lot of like funny kind of like quirks to it. But I didn't play much of it overall, and it wasn't too bad as a shooter though. Just don't know. But it seems very much like one of those where if you do not like that humor at all, then you're not gonna like it. And obviously, one thing, I don't really need to speak too much about it because I don't have the best insight into what's happened. But obviously, Squanch Games, who are the developer, which was founded by the Rick and Morty creator Justin Roiland, there's obviously the controversy because of the various allegations against him, and I think because of that, he obviously no longer works at the studio, nor does he work at is it Adult Swim? I think it is. That obviously makes Rick and Morty. Obviously, he no longer still works there, and I think they're obviously, both of them continuing obviously without his leadership or whatever he was doing there. At least I assume that's how it is going now. And I assume that DLC has probably been made mostly without him being there. So yeah, I don't know. It's possible. I get the feeling that when they release this DLC, I assume it'll be paid DLC. I'm wondering if they'll do like a rebundle and it'll cost like the same price it does right now, but with that DLC. Um, so if it's got trophies and everything, maybe then I'll check it out. But I'm not really too sure. £50 is a bit steep. Personally, I just think it'll probably be a wait on sale, wait till it goes on sale kind of thing, for me. But yeah, moving on to the next topic here. So we got, this is what I'm gonna, well, I guess starting with High on Life there. Just gonna talk about a few games that have just come out recently. And then later I'll talk about games that are gonna be coming out soon, but I'll do this towards the end of the show. And just kind of what's been going on with them. So Diablo 4. I think this season launched on the 20th of July. The update went out on the 18th, and then the season actually began on the 20th at 10 a.m. PST. But Diablo 4's first season, called Season of the Malignant, launched, and hasn't had a great start. Not because of the seasonal content or anything itself, but because of the patch in particular that released on the 18th. Where, as far as I understand it, I've not actually played Diablo's new season. I need to go and finish the campaign still. That's one of the things I'm sort of people doing. I think that'll be what we're doing after I finish Final Fantasy mainly. But yeah, they it seems like the update did a bunch of things to do with nightmare dungeons. I think there was some issue there, but primarily there were a lot of people's like builds that were totally like nerfed across the board across most of the classes. Some people obviously said that they weren't as bad as people are saying. It's kind of all a mix of things, but essentially before that patch came out on the 18th, and I believe either the same day or the following day, they announced that they were going to do like a stream. I don't know if they're fireside chats or if they're like something like campfire chats or something like that. But they have like their main dev like reveal streams, and then they have like those which are kind of just like general like Q&A, almost talking about what's going on in the game and everything. And they basically just announced that they were going to host one of those. And it was in that stream that they held on the Friday. So the 18th is when the update or the patch kind of went out. The 20th is when the season launched, and then the 21st was when they sort of spoke about it. So very like the day after the season launches and 3 days after the the patch went out, they sort of spoke on a stream, and I listened into that, and they were sort of saying that, generally they don't want to release another patch like this again, or they won't. And they've sort of said that if they're gonna nerf anything in future, like to such extreme degree, unless something is just like totally breaking the game to like, they said that like they'll still move quick on things that are just absolutely broken, like things that are, like just totally, like you have like things that are like quote unquote people will call them broken, but they're not that bad. But then you have things that are like broken because of a certain bug or an issue or something like that just trivializes everything, and maybe PvP and things like that. And so they've said that things like that they'll still move quick on, but anything that's kind of within the bounds of the games and sort of intended, with what they've provided, they'll before nerfing those, they said that they want to pair them with kind of more enticing builds that people have to chase, kind of thing. And it did seem like that they're kind of they're kind of loosening up on the idea that like if something is OP, they don't have to move straight away, or they don't have to like nerf it, but they will wait until they've kind of they'll give it its time, give it enough time in the game, let people kind of mess around with it, and until they've kind of figured out a better balance patch for other gear and builds, or unless they've introduced something new, they won't go in and nerf it, kind of thing. Which I think is an interesting. I mean, I think that's kind of, it's probably the better way to be, just because it's like you don't want to. I mean, everyone's pretty frustrated over this. I don't quite know the specifics of it, but yeah, it seems like when they want to change the meta, they'll make sure that they're going to communicate ahead of time that they're going to do that, as well as kind of yeah, just in general provide people with better, more of a heads up, and also provide extra builds in the game that people can go after that are going to be better or as good as and as enticing as the ones that they're using, rather than just like straight up nerfing them, kind of thing. The one thing I'll say though is that it is good. It like this kind of continues their candid nature, Blizzard. Just the way that they're the way that they sort of come out on stream and they're just like talking about this. And honestly, I mean, I love like deep dives from devs. I love like getting like the insight into how they build stuff and develop things. I think it's really interesting and really cool. And especially kind of being candid and upfront with people. I think it's what you need for a live game, kind of thing. But you have to. The interesting thing is that you can't just be like that all the time without actually having good to kind of show for it, kind of thing. Like you need to be providing like good content, good updates, as well as so that when you are candid and upfront, like it doesn't come across as like trying to make excuses all the times. And it doesn't seem like that to me. I don't actually know what people think of the season so far. I think I've actually not heard much about the season, but I think that could be because this patch has kind of dominated the discussions right now. So I'm still, it's like I explained in the last episode, I still think the idea of like working all season to kind of put together builds with items that you will lose at the end of the season is kind of a weird concept, because it doesn't, and you have to create a new character, which is not necessarily I don't dislike creating a new character, but it does seem weird that you're basically creating temporary builds for the season. It seems like primarily the goal is just kind of having a different experience in the sandbox or whatever, and then using that and like enjoying that whilst you're like hunting the new items, as well as the new items as in the new permanent items that they've added, as well, whilst also like completing challenges and unlocking the battle pass and things like that. And so yeah, that's it about Diablo's patch. Nothing else really to say there. So I do want to get back to that, and so maybe the next episode of this rolls around, maybe I'll have played Diablo and I'll have something to talk about there. So we'll see. As a couple of like final notes though, or a couple of final topics, sorry. There's just two games that have just come out, or one in early access, the other one permanent. Like I say permanent, you know what I mean, like a full actual release. Pikmin 4 is just released on the Switch. It's got really good reviews. I think like I think it sure it was like a lot of tens, and it's interesting how this will all shake out. When it comes to like the Game of the Year awards and things like that. I feel like Pikmin is still going to be quite a niche game, but it's safe to say Nintendo have had a really good year so far with like Tears of the Kingdom back in May, I think it was, yeah, and then now Pikmin 4, and then they've still got Super Mario Wonder in October and Mario RPG in November as well. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on. I'm personally like Wonder I'm interested in, but I'm going to be playing Spider-Man 2 that day, I think, because obviously that's I'm more a PlayStation centric player. But Super Mario RPG, I'm honestly really curious about, and it's so funny playing Final Fantasy 16 because that has reinvigorated, or not honestly reinvigorated, just invigorated me or whatever in general. Like it's made me feel like, oh, I want to check out a lot of these older games, and I've sort of had a. It's why I've recently. It probably maybe something worth talking about its own topic at some point, but I went on like a bit of a spending spree recently, almost to pick up a bunch of Final Fantasy games physically, just for collector's purposes. But also, I bought like I think I've got like was it? I think I probably explained this before, but I just like bought a bunch of the old games. And I bought Final Fantasy One, the Pixel Remaster, um, and I'm honestly it might be something I start once I finish Final Fantasy 16. I'm kind of jumping between a few games at the moment of what I want to start, and so Mario RPG almost looks to kind of continue, and in itself. Is enticing because of that kind of era and what kind of game it is. And it's honestly a type of game that I don't think I was really ever that interested in. But over time, I just seem to be more sort of involved or in interested in sort of turn-based RPGs and just that kind of style of game. And a big part is just the presentation and the soundtrack. There's actually a game I will be talking about right at the end that's coming out at the end of August. Uh, Sea of Stars, I think it's called, it looks very much like that kind of style, and I just looked at the art style, it just looks amazing, honestly, and it's same with Octopath Traveler 2, I seem to have this, like, I don't know where it's come from, but it's like, not only is it cool just seeing those kind of games still being released, it's also interesting as someone who has never really played those kind of games to be able to have so many to choose from. And so yeah, getting a remake of Super Mario RPG is really cool. And so yeah, and Pikmin 4, which is I guess is the main game I'm talking about here. I haven't yet played the demo of that. Again, that'll probably be what I'm going to do after Final Fantasy 16. And if I really like it, I'll probably be picking Pikmin up. And so we'll see how it happens there. But yeah, it's really cool to see that that's got really good reviews. And honestly, Nintendo just keeps going with their really high rated and high quality releases. It's really cool, honestly. They're probably the best out of PlayStation, Xbox, and like the big three, if you will. It's why like some people were talking before that like, oh, Nintendo's a competitor to PlayStation and Xbox, and it's like, well, I agree in the sense that yeah, they're in the same space, but I'm just like, I feel like Nintendo are just so off on their own in their own world, doing their own thing and being so successful doing it that they're not even really in the same space at the end of the in a way, because they're just they have like the least powerful hardware of the three, and yet they're releasing some of the best games and more often than the three. It's pretty amazing, honestly. um but yeah, that's it for Pigman. Next, just as a final thing here to kind of wrap up this section, Remnant 2 has just released in early access a few days ago. Its full release is actually tomorrow, the 25th of July. Again, much like Pikmin here, this has got really good reviews, and it's actually one I do want to check out. It wasn't intending to check it out, I was kind of like thinking about it, but then as I've seen more these good reviews, hearing it's obviously a looter game and an RPG, it is like a Souls-like. I've always been curious how you can do like Souls combat or Souls style stuff in a shooter. And I've seen a bit of gameplay and I sort of think I understand what it's like, but I don't think I'll fully know until I actually properly play it. And there's difficulty options as well, so I don't actually know I don't know what the scale of like, easy to difficult is. But one thing that I thought was interesting was it appears that it seems like it's a fairly simple game to 100%, or like fairly reasonable for a lot of people to do. But if you want to kind of do everything or find everything, it sounds like there's actually a shit ton of stuff. And basically, the principal designer of Remnant 2, his name's Ben Cureton, I hope I pronounced that correctly, he basically took to Twitter to discuss about the game's sort of length and secrets. And he said, quote, "For those that love secrets and exploring, no one has seen or obtained 100% of everything Remnant 2 has to offer. I'm talking about hardcore players with over 400 plus hours, reviewers that had early access, even our own internal developers. No one. Remnant 2 has secrets within secrets. We've made sure... Sorry, let me reread. Remnant 2 has secrets within secrets within secrets. We made sure obtaining 100% achievements is very player-friendly, and then went far beyond that to keep the game rewarding long after you've hit that goal. Lots more in store. Let's take this journey together, explore, discover, and share." End quote. And I thought that was really interesting, honestly, because it seems like it's a crazy big game, and I didn't realize. I think I saw someone doing there was a puzzle in the game, so it seems like there's actually kind of like some puzzle stuff in there, which is interesting. Um, but yeah, it's honestly one I'm curious about. Again, there's like 4 or 5 games that I've probably mentioned just here that I want to check out of the Final Fantasy 16, but it's looking like I have no idea what I want to play. There's just too much. This year has been just insanity, honestly, for games. Like I can't believe it. Like it just keeps going and going, and we're over halfway through, but yet we've still got like a like an avalanche of games still to come, and I don't understand how I'm gonna play any, or I say any of them, but just all of them. It will be impossible. I found it funny actually going back to Diablo. I saw that Diablo's um second season begins on like October 17th. I'm like, oh good, like the middle of like the busiest week in games this year. Or one of the busiest weeks anyway. A lot of people pointing to September. There's a lot of games coming out in September, but I really think October's just got everything. And we don't even know when Call of Duty is coming out, which I assume might be October, could be November as well. Not that I'm particularly interested in that, but that's typically like a big like juggernaut kind of thing. And yeah, and I think I think I actually nearly forgot this one. I fight like the actual final parts of this section. Basically, Exoprimal, I was memeing on it. Like people were, didn't think it looked that great, but I don't know. Like it actually seems like it might be alright, kind of thing. I don't know. I haven't played it. I've not watched that much gameplay, but it didn't look too bad. I didn't play the beta or the demo or anything like that, but people seem to be enjoying it, and I don't know. I just was kind of surprised. I don't think it got. I think it. I don't know. Well, I saw a review. I think it was like a 6 out of 10, but which doesn't surprise me. That kind of where I thought the game would be anyway. But they've already announced that they're going to do this. So they've got here, like they've got a new update coming soon that's going to have a new Skywave Alpha variant exosuit, which apparently has offensive support, a new weapon called Tempest Lance, and new moves and more. That's what the tweet from the official Exoprimal Twitter reads. But yeah, I honestly have no idea if I'll check this one out. I probably won't, but it seems like it's alright, honestly, and that's kind of cool, honestly. I mean, it's always cool when a game. It's a bit like that X Defiant, which, to be fair, I did say I thought looked pretty decent way back when it was announced, and I thought it looked like what COD was and what people wanted from COD, and people were memeing on it, people made fun of it, and then the betas rolled around, and people were saying it's actually pretty good, so, I'm just saying, maybe I was right there, but Exoprimal I was definitely not right on, because if it's actually decent, again, decent, like it's not, it's like above average kind of thing, but that's better than being not good kind of thing, and I think even Push Square was saying it was like one of the best co-op shooters out there or something like that, so I don't know, it looks fun, honestly, it looks like it could be fun, could be a good co-op game, and it's cool to kind of see that, um, the way it's shaken out sort of thing, because we were just joking about it a lot of the time. So yeah. So I think I think that pretty much wraps up everything about that. As I said, Exoprimal looks kind of alright. As I said, don't really know if I'll check it out, but it's cool to see a game, as I said, turn out like that. But that's all I got for these kind of smaller news topics. So I'm gonna get now into what I've been playing. I've actually only been playing like 2 games really in the last couple of weeks. Pretty much because one of them, which I sort of alluded to, having to take up so much of my time. But before diving into Final Fantasy 16, I thought I would just talk about briefly about another game that I recently picked up that actually ties into the Final Fantasy theming, and that is Theatrhythm Final Bar Line, which I haven't actually played in a few days now. But generally, what I was doing was I was like basically like before I was playing any other game, I was basically like playing a few rounds of this game each day. Honestly, it's been a little kind of surprise game this year. It actually did release this year as well, which I think I remember seeing it release and then kind of just like didn't see anything on it, and then but I was curious about it, and then like picking up recently, I've kind of got into it. But for people that don't kind of know what it is, this is basically a rhythm-based Final Fantasy game. And so you have like pieces of music from like every Final Fantasy game, at least as far as I'm aware, pretty much all of them. I'm sure there's some that aren't there, but you know what I mean. Generally, all of the mainline games, they're there. And you basically you play songs kind of as part of quests, and and the quests are like for each game. You can kind of like pick each game that you play, and when you beat those songs, you then unlock them in a music player, or you can play them kind of whenever you want, sort of thing. But when you get so far into a game, you essentially you're given a key, and you can unlock any of the or most of the sort of, you know, most of what's available. You know, you can unlock like one of the games essentially, and then you will play like 4 or 5 songs, and then you unlock a chest, which gives you another key, which you can then use on to unlock another game's pieces of music, or whatever, and quests. And there's like several several different stages or whatever to each sort of quest. So all these different pieces of music that you can play. It's actually quite a lot of music for each game. Um, and essentially each game, like each Final Fantasy game, it generally has its own base difficulty, which it tells you, and then you can also up the difficulty of each of these songs. And there's even like alternate kind of mode variants that you can play as well, which I haven't messed around with. I've kind of stuck to the standard style of play. I've tried some higher difficulty stuff, and I will say I have no idea how anyone can get through some of the this stuff, because it is seriously just wild. Some of the difficulty, like on the higher end, I was just like, I can't even believe people are, I don't even know how I would get to the point where I can play that well. And that was on the highest setting on a song that has like, or on a piece of music that has like a base difficulty of like 1 or 2 or something, and it goes up to 9. I think, I don't know. I don't know how that scaling works really. But yeah, and essentially, yeah, it has quite a good range of difficulty there. And another thing that's whenever you open up with different games, you unlock the characters from that game that then you can put in your party. And sort of on that note, basically the Final Fantasy ties is not only just the music and the sort of visuals, it's also the fact that there's a party system, and the kind of gameplay, or sort of what you see in the background as you're playing the songs, or the notes. The party that you've kind of put together is like progressing through a level, or they're fighting enemies and bosses, and you can actually level them up, and you can equip them with abilities, and you can find collectible cards to kind of boost them. It's really pretty expansive, honestly, and it's been a fun little side game that's just got absolutely just a shit ton of unlocks, like just across like modes, difficulties, cards, collectible like art that you can kind of look at on those cards. It's a really pretty expansive little game, and there's multiplayer on it as well. I think there's like 380-ish pieces of music overall, and that's not including the DLC packs, which add different pieces of music from other Square Enix games, and I think you get their characters with them as well. And those DLCs, sorry, are actually really cheaply priced. They're like, I think it is. I'm sure it's like £3 or something for like one game, and you get like 5 or 6 pieces of music with it, which are just, it's surprising, honestly. And then you can buy them in like different passes, kind of things. So you have like Volume 1, Volume 2, and I think they've just released the last DLC for Volume 2, which means they've got another volume coming after this. I'm wondering if they're going to put Final Fantasy 16 music in there, or if they're going to kind of update the game any further than what they're doing currently. But yeah, it's just a neat game, honestly, and it's been a side game, a fun little side game, as I said. And while I haven't played it in a few days, that's mainly been because I'm just like, I need to blitz through Final Fantasy 16 now, and by blitz through I mean do all the side quests and everything, because that's all I keep doing. But yeah, Theatrhythm is cool, honestly. It's a fun little game. As I said, I've said it several times now. That I don't really have too much to say on it, but it's kind of just nice as a, you know, it's one of those where I would like to put more time into it, but I also don't feel like I can just dedicate hours and hours and hours just constantly to back and forth um to it. But it's honestly a really cool little like homage to the Final Fantasy series, and it's really interesting how they kind of took that cool like party system and the RPG elements and turn-based combat, and kind of put them to like a rhythm-based uh core gameplay. So you're playing the rhythm based sort of stuff, and you're leveling up these and I think so it's funny, like before Final Fantasy 16, obviously 16 is not in the game, but before that, my only experience with Final Fantasy primarily that I'd actually finished was Final Fantasy 15. So that was the first game I played, first game's piece of music I played in Theatrhythm. And so my party has just been made up of Noctis, Ignis, Prompto, and Gladio, and they're all like nearly like level 90 something now. And Yeah, it's interesting, honestly. It's a really cool game. I haven't played online or anything like that just yet. I don't have any of the DLCs, but I'm sort of still kind of slowly working my way through it. Ideally, I will kind of like finish the game or like unlock all, because that's mainly what I was doing. I was mainly just like playing each game till I get the keys so I can unlock another game, and then I know I've got all the games, and then I can kind of go through properly and do all of them. The nice thing is you don't actually need to beat the quests to unlock the songs. So like as long as you beat the song, you unlock the song. But if you want like the bonus reward that comes along with the quest, or if you want to like 100% each area, you have to beat the quests that and those quests can be things like, oh, deal X amount of damage or defeat the boss within X amount of seconds, and that will all depend on how well you play the rhythm based notes, and how that kind of racks up your score. But it also depends on the kind of abilities that your group's got, and each there's different archetypes as well within the group as well. So you can have like I think Ignis is a healer. Um, so there's a lot of like depth to it, and while you don't get like full control of that stuff, it is interesting how they kind of kind of transferred that across. They've brought across that those kind of key Final Fantasy things like elements, and then they've applied it to a rhythm based setting, and I think that's really really interesting. And honestly makes me it's almost like you talk about thinking about like crossover games with like Smash Brothers and things like that. It almost makes me wonder, like, could you do something like that, whether for Mario or for PlayStation games? You could have like iconic pieces of music, but have it wrapped up in like a sort of crossover game of some kind. And I think that'd be really cool, honestly. Plus, Final Fantasy's got some amazing pieces of music. That's one thing that I'm sort of like trying not to. It's sort of like I don't want to listen to the music too much because I want to play these games properly first time, first, and listen to the music firsthand, like that way. Um, but this game obviously makes it a bit difficult to do that since it's all about the music. But there are some really great pieces of music in Final Fantasy, and it's honestly just incredible. Honestly, I love the soundtracks, and I love Final Fantasy 15 soundtrack, and 16 soundtrack is also amazing. But speaking of 16, um, let's talk about Final Fantasy 16, which I intend to talk about again soon. So I'm gonna speak about it for a bit now, but I don't want to get too deep into it. Spoiler free. I'll talk a little bit about the gameplay. So if you don't want to hear anything at all about gameplay, then yeah, you can skip through to the next timestamp or whatever. But I'm currently 94% of the way through the story according to PSN, or the PS5. And what's baffling to me is when it was about like 88, 89%, it introduced something new to me. Like something like a new part of the game that like adds more content. And I found something else last night that suggested that maybe there could be more. And I was like, and I just I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I'm like this late into the game, and that's like, oh yeah, no, there's more. Like not just more content, but like more systems and things that you can kind of mess around with. Um, but I have so many good things to say about this game. Uh, you know, First I'll just sort of say that the world, I think the world in this is amazing, and it's kind of funny how it's like it's so dangerous and scary, yet it's so also appealing. I mean, I like fantasy settings anyway, and like medieval stuff, so that maybe I'm a bit biased there. But there's just so many like cozy little areas and so many like great characters and like places you don't just want to. It's not just about playing the game. It's like, man, we almost want to be there. Like, you can almost like feel like, oh man, I wish I could actually explore this area IRL, and stuff. And it's just really amazing, and it's great to when you're playing a game and you're enjoying the game and everything else. But like the fact that if you feel like you want to be in that world, it's a really great feeling, and it's just really cool to have that here. And it's interesting because like the combat, like in terms of the combat, like you could argue that like it's the core of it isn't that deep, and some might say it's repetitive. But to me, like there's enough depth that kind of lets you find these kind of like there's different layers to it and avenues of how you can play. One thing I found out the other day, which I guess it makes sense when I thought about it, but like it's quite forgiving. I think it's called Stomp in this, and I think it's called Enemy Step in DMC in Devil May Cry. But basically, when you're in midair, you can jump off an enemy, whether they're on the ground or whether they're up in the air with you. And if the enemy's kind of like up in the air with you, if you press X and you jump off them, and by jump off it means you just keep yourself in the air, it keeps the enemy up in the air with you as well. And so if you start falling, what you can do is you can like jump up in the air, you jump off them and hold yourself up in the air a bit longer and attack them more. And you can kind of chain that in with your sword attacks as well. And again, one of the icons that you get pretty early on called Garuda. The ability that you have is just you can just pull enemies towards you, and so that's also cool. So you could be like really high in the air, and you can kind of like pull enemies from off the ground up into the air with you, and you can attack them there. And it's just even like 40 or 50 hours in, I'm finding these little kind of like um little kind of like I don't say quirks, but just certain things about the combat that I'm discovering and as I'm playing around more, and it's quite cool how many different little things you can do, and that's without even mentioning like the set of abilities that you have access to, because again, the game's got a ton of different abilities, and it was only just last night that I actually decided to essentially, when you put enough ability points into abilities, you get to master them, and you can apply them to any equipped icon. So you can have like, the Garuda, for example, like I said earlier. But if you don't like Garuda's abilities, which is why I've been using Garuda's abilities for a while, and I do like them, but I decided I was like, you know what, I'm going to change. I'm going to put this ability on and this ability on from these two other icons. So I now have two abilities on Garuda, which are from two different icons. Two different icons different from Garuda. So and it's just really cool to have that sort of flexibility, and I also like how it's kind of like you have to master them, so it's kind of like there's a bit of a grind. You've got to kind of unlock things, and I will say I've unlocked a ton of things, but there's still so much I've got to unlock in terms of abilities, and I think those two are the only abilities I actually have mastered in the entire game. Um, but yeah, it honestly just this game is just super satisfying to play, and combat just pretty much has never gone old. And again, especially as you're unlocking new abilities pretty consistently, like throughout the game, like literally throughout, not like, into like about halfway, 60%, and then it's kind of the same. It's like, no, you are unlocking stuff, like I said, 80-90% of the way through, and it's really impressive. Um, but it's so funny because it's like, in some ways, I'm like, I'm ready to kind of move on and play something else, but at the same time, I'm like, I want to replay this. And I feel like there's so much that's gone on in this world, and so much that I want to probably get a sense of, in terms of like the characters' histories, their motivations, what's going on. There's parts of the game where it cuts away and shows you what's going on elsewhere, and I don't think I quite fully understood who those characters were sometimes, at least on the first time I saw them, or the second time, whatever. But as I kind of have played the game more, I'm like, oh, right, so that's that character, and I understand more of the conflict, and there's a lot of ways that you can actually explore that in the lore in the game, which is really cool. But it's just a huge world with like so much going on in it. Um, so yeah, I'm looking at it. It's like I do want to go for the platinum as well for this game. I think you have to beat it on what's called Final Fantasy mode, which I think is an extra difficulty, but I don't know if that's New Game Plus, if that's what they call New Game Plus, or if that's a new difficulty. New Game Plus is kind of separate. Um, but I do want to replay it, and that's kind of it. I've been thinking about it for so long. I'm like, man, this and it's funny. You look back at like where you were, like story wise at the beginning of the game and things like that, and you feel like you've gone on such a long like journey and adventure. It's really impressive, honestly. Um, and it's so funny because as well, because like whilst there are aspects that are of like a lower quality, so much of the game is high in quality that it almost overshadows that stuff. Not to make it seem that like that stuff is so bad, but it's like it doesn't matter if that stuff isn't as good or lower budget, because the main stuff is so good, and that lesser stuff is something you get used to, and you can kind of like certain things are interesting, other things aren't. And I will say, um side quests have definitely gotten better. Like as you get through the game, even the ones that seem like they weren't going anywhere have gotten better, sort of thing. I think my biggest issue is like when the story kind of pauses itself, and it's like, oh, we want you to do a bunch of like fetch quest style quests, and then you beat that, and then suddenly a bunch of other side quests open up, and it's like, I'm trying to go for the 100%. So I wish you just kind of gave me those first. I kind of understood that, and then I could just focus entirely on the story and do it the other way around, rather than letting me, making me do this kind of fetch quest stuff now, and then also making me do side quests. I say making me do, that's my choice, but it just feels like you could have sort of worked that a different way. But again, like what I said a minute ago, when this story like goes, it like really goes, and it lasts quite a while sometimes as well. And so you get like a lot of story, maybe a crazy boss battle, amazing music, great dialogue, just a bunch of just really high quality, great stuff. And it means they're like, oh, I don't care that I spent like 2 hours doing side quests. You know, I got this like 2 or 3 hour stretch of story. It doesn't always happen, but when you do, it's really high quality. And it does, I will say, it does feel like now I'm this close to the end, it feels like it's constantly moving, which is good. So I will say that it does seem like, as where I'm at right now, it feels like they understood when they needed to kind of like focus entirely on like the story, you know, and let the story and let people just kind of get through that if they want to. And it's to the point where even though a bunch of other hunts have just opened up, I have only seen one side quest that was literally on the path to where I was going to the next part of the story. So while the hunts kind of pulled me away for a bit, when I carried on with the story, that side quest just kind of like was a little extra story to kind of go alongside a very short quest, and it was on the same, pretty much the same path as I'm heading towards this next story destination. Um, you know, and I have, well, so there is. So I was gonna say the RPG elements. I think I spoke about this last week, but they have deepened from where they were, you know, but not by much. I don't think, to be fair. I think they seem like they were early on in the game, but then it kind of didn't go anywhere after that. And it just feels like gear just doesn't have much impact. You know, like you basically have three gear slots that are primarily just increasing your damage and stun and defense values and your health, and then you have accessories which will have different effects, like reducing the cooldowns of abilities, increasing their damage, and maybe there are a couple of actual other effects like boosting potion potency and things like that. And it's not too bad. I just kind of feel like they could have gone a bit further here, or even the other way, integrated more of that into the core game. But I will say that I still have a sense that I'm like, oh, I wouldn't mind tinkering around with that and messing around with it. But again, everything else is so good that it's like, sure, I wish maybe it was more there, but I don't feel like it's missing something elsewhere, if you know what I mean. It feels like it's a system that's trying to do something, but it doesn't quite achieve what it wants to do. But it also feels like when you're playing the main combat, you're not missing much. I think maybe it feels like it's missing just a little bit extra, like, you know, like I'm thinking of like, oh, you can add an element to your weapon, you can charge up your weapon, but you know, there's certain things. Like another thing is that I don't, and I'm hoping this is in Final Fantasy mode. Enemies, I don't know if enemies have weaknesses to certain elements, kind of thing, and so that's something because it tells you whenever you get a new set of abilities, it's like, oh, this changes um, the element of Clive's magic, and I'm thinking, okay, that's cool, but that to me at the moment it's just a color, like it doesn't actually do anything. And I'm hoping that maybe that changes either in the end game or on the like New Game Plus or whatever. That's probably where I would put my critique most in terms of that, is that it sort of feels like we're not really seeing the elements of what you're using kind of change and what enemies are weak to and things like that, or even figuring that out. Like I think yesterday or the other day, I mean, this maybe it is a thing, I just didn't notice it, but I was fighting like an enemy that was like very fiery, and I tried hitting him with something. Well, I guess this is a spoiler, so I guess, well, this is like, I'm gonna say it, but well, maybe you could have guessed where I was going with it. But basically, I hit them with something. I hit an enemy with something that seemed like the opposite of the element, and he didn't seem to do anything extra, kind of thing. I won't spoil, I won't say anything, so hopefully that wasn't close, but yeah. Um, but to me, yeah, there's also one thing, as I said, one thing I'm interested in regards to that, but also just in terms of what else there is. I have heard that there's a bit of an end game. I don't really know what to expect right now, but I'm kind of not expecting much just because I want to keep my expectations in check. But one thing I will say is that this game has already surpassed my expectations, and it kind of just doesn't stop. It just keeps going, and it keeps getting better, and there's so many great things about it. And again, it's so fucking good. Uh, and it's honestly, this game, Final Fantasy 16, is just a triumph, and I am really looking forward. I want it. Like, I'm recording this, but I'm like, I just want to go and play the game. I've got to go and like put this together, edit this, and publish it. And I'm like, I just want to play the game, you know. And as I said, I'm ready to move on, but like at the same time, like I'm ready to move on because it's been hanging over me for like a month, right? And it's kind of been like this has been going on for a while, but yet, you know, I want to move on so I can play other stuff, but I'm also want to play more, and I want to replay it, and I want to get the platinum, and I want to do all this other stuff, and I'm just really invested in this. I'm almost looking forward to just going through everything again, and if I have all the abilities, and it's brilliant, honestly. And it's actually a shame that I'm coming towards the end because I'm like, I don't want it to end. Like, it's so good in everything it's doing, if you know what I mean, and I just want more. and that's why them potentially doing DLC is interesting to me, because I'm like, yes, just do that DLC, And someone suggested about if they did like a DLC with Sid, which I think would be awesome. I'd love Sid's a great character, and I think that'd be cool. But yeah, to wrap this up, I think anyone who's into action games, you're gonna like this, and I've seen that some didn't like it that much. I don't really know how. I mean, I personally of the belief that this is one of the best PS5 games to date that I've played. It's just a video game in its core. It's got everything you'd want from everything I want from a game, especially. And so much of it is pretty much all of it is such a high quality. You know, as I said, I'll be talking more about Final Fantasy 16 soon once I talk about my favorite games of this year, which I guess gives some stuff away. But it's safe to say that I like it very much. It's very good. um, but anyway, let's move on, and let's talk about some of these big news topics, some of these large news topics, before I kind of start wrapping up the show. So we've got quite a bit to get into, I think, for this week. A bit more interesting actually than I think last week. I think, well, last week, 2 weeks ago, though the Red Dead remaster was actually pretty significant, to be fair. But the first sort of main thing we actually kind of got like a two-sided set of topics. We've got 4 topics. Two very PlayStation centric, the other two very Xbox centric. It's a very balanced week, really. But basically, the first thing in terms of PlayStation is that details about a PS5 Pro have leaked, with information about its specs, where it's being demoed, dev kits, release date, and all that sort of thing. This comes from an article written by Tom Henderson over at Key2 Gaming. But apparently, the PS5 Pro has been in development since early 2022. Now, you have to forgive me in terms of the specs. I won't be particularly analytical because I won't quite know exactly, but it said that it's got 30 WGP and 18,000 MTS memory. I did do a bit of Googling on this, and my understanding is that the WGP is related to the GPU, and the 18,000 MTS is obviously related to the memory. And while my knowledge is sort of limited, it basically sounds like the upgrades are going to the GPU and the RAM or the memory, which I think it sounds similar to what happened with the PS4 Pro. I remember, because I remember this being a topic of discussion back then. Basically, the PS4 Pro was improving on the GPU, but not so much the CPU, and so that meant that certain games that kind of relied more on the CPU or whatever wouldn't run as well, or wouldn't run with the same upgrades essentially, or wouldn't have access to the same things. That's at least that was my understanding at the time. I haven't really delved too deep into all of that, but that was sort of my understanding back then. But essentially, in terms of like the intended upgrades over the original PS5, Tom mentioned in this article that it's going to basically it's going to have an improved and more consistent FPS, frames per second at 4K resolution. It's going to have a new performance mode for 8K resolution, and it will also have obviously all that with accelerated ray tracing. And Tom also mentions in this article, he talks about when it's being tested and shown, and he says, quote, "Despite dates being tentative, it's understood the demo events for the PS5 Pro are already ongoing, with the majority of studios receiving development kits by late November 2023, end quote. And apparently it's targeting a release date of around, November 2024, which I think it lines up with previous leaks, which I think those original leaks also came from Tom Henderson as well. One thing that I thought was a bit of an interesting bit of trivia here, is that you might have noticed, well, you might have heard, basically the code name for this is called Trinity, and basically I didn't realize, but these are obviously Matrix references. Well, I think I realized before, but they're references to Matrix, and as Tom Anderson says, if you think, well, quote, "If you think the code name has some form of familiarity, you're right. Sony has used the Matrix code names in the past, with the PlayStation 4 Pro under the codename Neo and PlayStation VR under Morpheus," end quote. So yeah, interesting news, honestly, this. I imagine places like Digital Foundry and things like that will have a much better deep dive onto like what all of this means and everything like that. But this kind of does tie into things about like the discussion of whether we're heading back to 30 FPS games, and this kind of started because certain games were releasing without performance modes or without 60 FPS or without being able to probably hit 60 FPS or whatever else like that. And Digital Foundry, I think, actually said before that they believe that like they they think that, like, as we get further into the generation, that will be happening more. And I imagine they do have insider knowledge to confirm this, but I personally just believe that whilst that may be true for certain games, like something like Starfield, as I'll get into in a minute, makes sense. But I just feel like performance and quality modes are pretty much here to stay, at least primarily for first-party PlayStation games. I feel like that is a staple. I feel like it's almost become like the photo mode of this generation. Well, I say this generation, I guess it came in late last gen, because there were certain games that had, with the PS4 Pro, they had different, performance, they had frame rate on caps and things like that, and resolution boost. And I just kind of feel like as photo modes kind of became a thing, that's like another thing here, is that we're getting performance and quality modes, and it's kind of like that. It's giving access for console players to basically have similar access to PC style settings, but in a much more easier to understand way. That's easier to understand and easier to kind of like read the differences. Which I think is really cool, because I've always admired PC for all of the advanced settings, and while I don't know if I want that on consoles, I think it's good that we kind of at least have the ability to kind of tweak. Do we want the frame rate or do we want the resolution? I think the choice is the important thing here. But yeah, then you get games like Final Fantasy XVI coming out, with I didn't even talk about that before, but the performance not being great, and obviously Starfield, being blocked to 30 on Series X and Series S, obviously, and obviously PC will be uncapped or whatever you can run it at. But games like that have kind of led to speculation that games are becoming, more and too ambitious, that, they can't run at 60. But I think there's a little bit more nuance, in particular with both Starfield and Final Fantasy 16. With Starfield, it's a huge game, right? It's super dense, and you got all these little objects, and you can pick them up and drop them anywhere. And so I can imagine, to process that, to run that on a console and keep it feeling good and keep it consistent, you kind of have to cap it somewhere. You have to kind of put like a stop and be like, right, this is where we're aiming for, at minimum. And actually, I think what I'll say here with Final Fantasy 16 almost could tie into Starfield, and it's that, maybe at one point, as a Digital Foundry speculated on this, I believe as well, that was it being built for 30 FPS first, and then that kind of like performance mode stuff kind of came out at the time. You think these games have been in development for a while, both Final Fantasy 16 and Starfield. Starfield been in development probably longer, but Final Fantasy 16 was, Final Fantasy 15 came out in 2016, so it's been, about 6.5 years since the release of that, or a bit more than that, I think. Whether or not that's been the exact development time, but I would imagine it's somewhere close to that. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they were working on 30 FPS first, and so obviously, and that's where you get things like the cutscenes being a 30 FPS kind of thing. And I think for Starfield it makes sense. It's a bit of a shame, of course, because it's like, oh man, it would have been cool to play that at 60 on console. But it's totally understandable. And so I think these are examples of games that I'm like, that they are doing something different, or they are in these certain circumstances that I think led them to a point where it's like, yeah, well, it's unlikely that they were going to have like the best performance. I will say Final Fantasy is a bit weird, because we were kind of under the impression when they said that the game was basically finished like a year ago, and then it releases with performance issues. A bit of a weird situation. But yeah, with all that in mind, that's kind of all of the preface to kind of say that hopefully with the PS5 Pro that we will keep seeing these options, and that will allow them to kind of be like, if you really want the higher frame rates, then you can go to the PS5 Pro. I wish that wasn't the answer. Like, I'm hoping that 60 continues to be like the focus on PS4, PS5, like base PS5, as much as it can, and then as you kind of, when you get into things like 4K, when you get to like things like 8K, I hope that that's where, that's the kind of like, if you really want the super hardcore stuff, I feel like 60 FPS should start to become a standard again, and I feel like it almost is in certain cases, and I think that's a good thing, because it's just weird. Like, to me, 60 is just the baseline, and I don't think you need to go above that, really. Like, 30 is fine, but it's like, but if you just aim for 60 and then go from there, and I know that, devs might be wanting to, like, focus on the graphics, but I'm like, yeah, but, like, why can't, like, you've got a more powerful machine right now, and soon, in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to have another high powerful console. Like, surely 60 FPS can be the base. If we have games looking like The Last of Us and Uncharted and God of War and even Spider-Man back last gen, and they run at 60 on PS5, I'm like, that's pretty good, and I imagine you can go further graphically on this platform. So I just don't quite see why certain games can't get 60. I can imagine as you get a little bit more crazy, like, to be fair, Final Fantasy XVI does have really demanding boss fights and really, like, over-the-top graphically, but then in general combat and gameplay, it doesn't seem that demanding, and it does struggle to hit 60 FPS, so again, with Final Fantasy in particular, I do think that there is, like, an issue of, like, they probably weren't planning to have that from initially, and so they built the game assuming it'd be 30 and then kind of had to, like, add in things later. So yeah, hopefully that's what the PS5 Pro can allow, is for, like, the super extreme, like, high-end stuff, and 60 FPS does become more of a focus in general. But it's funny though, because I wasn't really a fan of the PS4 Pro when it was announced, and it also didn't seem like it was much of an upgrade or it was that worth it, but I'm sort of hoping that the PS5 Pro will be different, and obviously we'll have to wait and see, but I do think that just kind of having that option there to maybe have more around a kind of consistent frame rate, resolution, all that stuff, on top of the more demanding games, I think will be good as long as it's a big enough upgrade. And of course, I don't know the technical specifications, that deeply to know whether or not these sort of those, as Tom Henson points out in this article, the where is it? Yeah, the 30 WGP and the 18,000 MTS memory. Like, I don't know what that means fully. I looked up, like, the WGP is apparently 2 compute units, and that is, it was basically a way that you can have more processing information going to, like, on the graphics and shader caches and things like that. But it was one of those where it was like, I'm not trying to look for a tech lesson while I'm trying to write this podcast, but, essentially that's how I understand it. And short or long is that it's making the GPU and the memory better, at least. And I assume the memory makes it better because then you're able to help the SSD when you're loading stuff, because you can keep things in cache a bit better, so you can load things quicker or whatever. But yeah, that's an interesting piece of news. I'm certainly curious to see when that'll be revealed. I assume we'll hear about it probably next year. I don't see us hearing about it this year, unless they want to get out ahead of any further leaks or whatever, but we'll see. So next, there's not too much to talk about here. I'm looking at it now. I haven't even gone through and bolded anything in this section, so we'll see how I can read through this section without or I'll look through key points I've written down. But basically, they showed off at San Diego Comic-Con a new story trailer for Spider-Man 2, as well as announcing a limited edition console controller and PS5 faceplates. And so we'll talk about the sort of limited edition stuff first before I get into the game. Basically, there's a Spider-Man 2 themed PS5 console, looks really cool, along with a controller and faceplates. Essentially, you can buy the console with a code of the game, which I assume... So basically, it releases on September 1st, ahead of the game's release on October 20th, and you can pre-order these from PlayStation Direct starting July 28th. But I'm assuming the code... If you can get the console, this limited edition console, on the September 1st, I'm assuming that the code just kind of unlocks it for you on the store, and then you can just download it, because it comes with a digital code for the game. I assume it'll be a code that then they can kind of ship, and you can get and enter, so you can have it ready, so you can preload it ahead of time, which is actually quite nice, considering other things, like other collector's editions that, like the God of War collector's edition that came with a code, but released on the day the game comes out. But yeah, there's a really nice looking set of stuff here. I really like the controller personally, so if I get it, I might just get the controller. But what's really nice here is that, unlike last gen, because of the way that the PS5 is built, you can buy, if obviously people don't want to buy just a new console just to get the limited edition look. Some people will, but you can actually just buy the faceplates and the limited edition stuff, and you can take your current ones off and put these on, which I think is really cool. Which I don't know, I'm trying to think. This is certainly the first time they've done that with PlayStation, I think, because the PS4 didn't have... There were probably, like, third-party things you could buy, but at least PlayStation, like Sony themselves, the the first time they've allowed you to kind of like buy them separately. But I think that's a really cool thing you can do, and it is. It's I've always thought this when I see a limited edition console, I'm like, man, I'd really like that, but I don't know if I want to buy a new console just to have that kind of thing. But yeah, they come out September 1st. The game comes out October 20th, and you can pre-order those July 28th. But in terms of the game itself, in terms of that trailer, there's a bit I've got to talk about. I won't spend too long on it because I actually haven't seen the trailer. Because I'm sort of I was just kind of like, oh, I might just wait till launch. You know, I've got the game pre-ordered. I have no intention. I have no reason to kind of watch it. Maybe if they do a state of play or anything else or any blogs, I'll talk about it before then. Um, but I have obviously seen some of the screenshots, and I did see a bit of the trailer. I didn't watch all of it. I sort of saw a bit of it. Didn't really hear what was being said, so I don't really know. But I can kind of sort of see vaguely kind of what it's about and what's going on. But one thing I'll say is that graphically, it does look like a big step up from the previous games, both Spider-Man that came out in 2018, as well as Miles Morales, which I still haven't played, but I intend to do both of them before this comes out, which I guess I'm gonna have to look at doing soon. So I don't just jump from one game to the next into the new game. But yeah, some people obviously sort of criticize it because it looks some characters look different. I get what they mean. I also just think some of it is a little bit kind of it's obviously a generational translation. I remember this happened with Uncharted a little bit. It also seems to be they've got a lot more facial animations going on, a lot more don't know how to describe it really, but just more animations and more kind of depth and things you can kind of see and read on people's faces. So I assume that is playing a little bit into it as well. As I said, I think generally that was just kind of a generational leap and just transferring them across from one gen to the next. Yeah, there's not too much about saying this. I do think I want to talk more on Spider-Man 2 in general at some point. More in reference to Insomniac as a developer and the kind of the, you know, what they kind of their work previously on Ratchet and Clank. Because like I'm a big Ratchet and Clank fan, and I personally was kind of let down by Rift Apart. It felt like an underwhelming kind of game to me, and what hurts even more is obviously everyone else says like, oh, it's really so much of the like it got a lot of critical praise, and I don't know how well it did in terms of sales, but it's kind of like it's a bit of a shame when I look at Spider-Man 2 and I look at how much work seems to be going into it and how good it looks and the set piece and everything like that, and it's like, man, it kind of feels, and what's funny is there's a lot of similarities between Rift Apart and Spider-Man 2, specifically at least the character switching and all that. And it just kind of makes me feel a little bit let down because I'm just sort of like, man, you could have done a lot more with Ratchet and Clank, and obviously I know where obviously a lot of the work and a lot of the budget will be going, which makes sense. But it is a bit of a shame personally for me, especially when I don't have access to those old those old games unless I go back to PS3 or unless I stream them, which it's not really the best way to play them, not really ideal. But despite obviously against what I'm saying, I do think Insomniac are the most interesting and best developer for PlayStation since the PS5 launched, and they just released a lot of games, so far. They're basically, I feel like they are almost carrying this generation, and they are probably the most interesting developer. I do think it's a bit dull that it's only Marvel games really that they're working on, but something I just suddenly remembered that I didn't include it because it actually broke, I think, late last night or something. But we found out actually Insomniac are apparently working on a third AAA game, and we don't know what it is. It's obviously unannounced, but it seems very much like it's not Wolverine and it's not Spider-Man 2. I'm curious to know what that is. I don't know if that's like I'm sure it said it was in production. And who was it that was? I don't know. I'm gonna try and we'll do this live. We will find out because I will find. Hold on. I will find this. This is going. We'll find this information live. I don't know why I forgot to put this in here. Yeah, I've got a push square article here. What was it? It was. That's right. Her name's Erin Eberhardt. I hope I've pronounced that. I probably totally butchered the name. And they basically, she sort of was working at, used to work, I can't even talk now, Jesus Christ. She used to work at Blizzard, and she apparently teased this title as part of a Full Sail University seminar. I really can't read or talk. And that's been obviously shared on social media, and she's currently a project director for the developer, for Insomniac. We'll just read directly from this Push Square article, but it says, quote, she reiterates twice that the game is unannounced and that she's unable to talk about it, so we are fairly confident this isn't Marvel's Spider-Man 2 or Marvel's Wolverine, as otherwise she'd likely just say so. She's also eager to stress that the game she's working on is AAA, so this isn't a side project. Presumably, it'll be its next big thing, end quote. I'm honestly curious. Yeah, I mean, Push Square suggests that maybe it's to do with the multiplayer game potentially, and I guess if you've come from Blizzard, that sort of makes sense. Um, it's funny. I've speculated. I've sort of thought before about the idea of a Ratchet and Clank live service game, which I don't like in my mind because it's like I don't like putting live service with a game that's typically single player. But I also can imagine. I feel like you could make like the ultimate Ratchet and Clank game. It doesn't have to be an existing forever game. It doesn't have to be still going in 10 years. But basically, just having a Ratchet and Clank game that is like is a strong base to work from, and then just having like 2 or 3 years of support through maybe like a big kind of DLC each year, and just having like a really like significant game where you've got like 100 weapons and 30 planets, you know, and I don't know if I'd really call it live service as such, but just, if you wanted to have seasons and stuff like that. But I don't like the idea fully, but I do think the Ratchet and Clank as an IP does have potential to be that. And I think I'd prefer it just be single player, but I also wouldn't be against the idea of having like a really big Ratchet, like one big Ratchet and Clank game, and it's a known IP. You could have co-op in there. They've had multiplayer before. There's a lot of things about Ratchet and Clank that lend themselves to live service, and a lot of people. But like in my mind, it's like the ideal version of live service. Like I'm not thinking microtransactions. I don't want it getting that far, and that's what would scare me because that's of course where people would want, particularly on the money making side, they'd probably want it to go that way, and that's not really where I'd want it to go. But I do think that would be. I can't lie. I just think it lends itself to some, having a game and it expanding over time. Um, whether or not it'd be the right thing to do, I don't know. But I just think that there is some potential there. I'm sure a lot of people would be like, "Man, that's a terrible idea," but it's like you can't disagree that like Ratchet and Clank is even though it probably isn't Ratchet and Clank, but it is a known IP, and it does have ways you can expand upon it. I mean, in a lot of ways, each sequel, like even the first three games, were kind of like almost expansions. They weren't like Ratchet and Clank was never like totally reinventing itself all the time or like a lot. But like that's what I mean. Like that means that you could just kind of be like, the definitive Ratchet and Clank game that has space battles and weapon upgrades and several like stories and campaigns and cutscenes and planets and all these weapons and upgrades and New Game Plus or Challenge Mode as it was called. Um, I think you could go wild with it, and I think you could have like a really solid game. Whether or not that would happen, whether or not it is a good idea, I'm certainly not one. I don't know if it would be a good business idea. I don't think it would be the right thing to do necessarily, but I also just think that it would be nice to have like a solid Ratchet and Clank game that pays homage, has a lot of nostalgia in it, has a lot of content in it, has a lot to replay, and has it. But you can play it like in these short bursts and play these certain different things, or you can play it as like one big expansive game. I think that would be really cool. Um, but yeah, I don't think I guess it would make sense if it's a multiplayer game. Thinking about if she's come from Blizzard and that's kind of the leadership. Um, but it'll be interesting to see. Honestly, it's interesting to see what they work on next. I swear to God, it better not be another Marvel game though. I don't want like Marvel's multiplayer or something, and it's like, oh no. Um, I don't want Insomniac becoming like only Marvel. I think it's honestly a bit dull that your best developer is only making Marvel games. Because are they the best developer because they're putting out that many games, or are they the best developer because it's Marvel games? And I'm pretty certain they're the best developer because they're putting out games. So it doesn't need to be Marvel, but you know, I just think that it would be cool to have. I would honestly like another Ratchet and Clank game, but I almost don't know if that's going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not, if we don't get another Ratchet and Clank game until next gen. Honestly, at the earliest question mark. I just hope that whenever it comes out next, that it's a significant game. I also hope, or I would like, that we get PS3 back compat natively at some point, which I've sort of spoken about before. That apparently that is a thing, and it does work on a few games, but it's obviously very takes a long time to sort out because every game has to have its own like bespoke emulator and emulation settings and everything. But yeah, I'll stop rambling on about that, but it'll be interesting to see what Insomniac's working on next. So technically that's actually 3 pieces of information. I'll get that all in with the sources and everything, with Pushware's article and everything when this all goes live. But yeah, we're going to move on now to talk about, let's become Xbox. Let's move from PlayStation, and well, I guess it's a bit PlayStation. There's a bit of PlayStation relevant here, but obviously it's talking about the Microsoft-Activision acquisition, that everyone's favorite topic that looks like it finally is at an end, or soon will be. And so yeah, we'll start with this. Essentially, the extension, they've got an extension. I don't know why I've taken it. I'm just like I'm looking at these words. I'm like, what does that mean? Essentially, the CMA in the UK were the ones that were holding back this deal, because the FTC and everything sort of that all fell through. Actually, I think last time we spoke about this, actually, I didn't even say about that. So the FTC lost. They tried to appeal and it didn't go anywhere. I think they went to, was it the Supreme Court or something like that, and they threw it out as well. Just didn't seem like it was going through at all. So they've basically, FTC have lost, Microsoft won that case, so everything looked like it was going through, and they had to kind of push for that like deadline. But they've just extended the deadline of this merger for the decision to be made till October 18th. Whilst they basically work on a better deal with the UK CMA, who have said that they're kind of like they're up to kind of renegotiating effectively, and things have kind of moved fast because now even PlayStation have kind of accepted a deal with Call of Duty, which is different from previous deal. But before we get into that, so Phil Spencer, in regards to the merger extension, Phil Spencer has tweeted, quote, Microsoft and Activision Blizzard have extended the merger agreement deadline to 10/18, so 18th of October. We're optimistic about getting this done and excited about bringing more games to more players everywhere, end quote. And then obviously since then, or I think it was since then or before then, Xbox have kind of finally made a 10-year deal with PlayStation to basically commit to bringing Call of Duty to PlayStation platforms for the next 10 years. But I think that's on top of the existing contract, so the existing contract ends in 2024, 2025, so it'll be approximately 2034, 2035 that that's when this Xbox PlayStation contract deal ends. And in regards to this deal, Phil Spencer also tweets saying, quote, we are pleased to announce that Microsoft and PlayStation have signed a binding agreement to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation following the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. We look forward to a future where players globally have more choice to play their favorite games, end quote. And so my issue here, there's not really much to talk about overall, because most of it, and this will probably be like the last time to talk about it, really. Unless I want to sort of cover where it's, once it's all finally done. But Phil going on about bringing more people games, or games to more people, and allowing people to play games what they want. We know this isn't true, and what I find really kind of frustrating is that tweet where he's specifically talking about Call of Duty going to, PlayStation, he's like saying that he looks forward to a future where players globally have more choice to play their favorite games, but he's talking about multiple games. But we know that they're going to make games exclusive, I'm sure, as they did with Bethesda and ZeniMax and all of that, because originally there was even a point, like, we've seen, like, what I'll get into, I sort of mentioned this a bit later, there's emails that were sent where they weren't even sure what was going on with Bethesda games, whether they were going to make them exclusive, and even Bethesda themselves, like, higher-ups like Todd Howard and P. Hines didn't even fully know about what was going on with them, and it just seems like a bit of a mess, but it also just seems like, we've also seen, like, internal emails where you've had, like, Matt Booty or whatever was, like, I think it was, saying that they want to buy PlayStation out of business kind of thing, or saying that they have they have the potential to do that sort of thing. And it's just like, I don't know how people can see these emails and see this kind of rhetoric and, and be like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, oh yeah, that's totally fine. Like, it's fine for them to just be like, oh, we want to buy PlayStation. No, of course, like, that's probably what maybe even PlayStation want to do. But I don't think PlayStation want to buy Xbox out of business, because they can't. They can't buy them out of business because they don't have the capital or the money to do that. And I just find that a lot of Xbox's behavior and the way they've acted in the last few years is so disingenuous and deceptive that everyone believes, and it makes PlayStation look bad. And I'm not bothered about PlayStation looking bad, but I am, in the sense that the way that Xbox are basically making them out to be worse than they are, and then people are kind of like taking these sides, taking the side of this huge corporation, it's baffling to me. you get things like where PlayStation are weird, where like the cross-play stuff, where even Nintendo were in on it, and PlayStation are like, I don't know, we don't want people having crossplay, and then eventually that's kind of broken down, and now crossplay has become like a staple of games, which is really awesome because it's such a cool feature. And so there are points like that where I'm like, well, PlayStation, you are bringing it on yourself, and that didn't help all of this kind of thing. But the way that they've been on occasions like that, and then the way that Xbox have kind of like made out that they're like the savior of the games industry, which is hilarious considering their mismanagement and the number of games that they've released in general, but also the games they've released that haven't been that great. Um, they basically gained a load of support from people. The people are just like supporting them, regardless. And I'll try not to speak too long overall on this because I did speak quite a while about this last time, but I've just been frustrated to the reactions of people online because people don't seem to consider it from the point of view that like this deal is unmatched. Like I think this is probably the single biggest deal that's happened. I don't know if it's in the world, but at least in games, 100%. And it's letting one of the biggest publishers that brings in a ton of money get bought by another company that also has a lot of money, and yet, you know, they don't really have much to show for it. Really, like it's not like and a lot of people are like look at this. It's like, oh, well, PlayStation has exclusives, and it's like, yeah, but not like this. You know, I don't think Call of Duty would ever go exclusive to PlayStation in a year. I don't think that would ever be something. I don't even know if that's something they would try. Maybe they've tried. Who knows? Um, But it's like I don't know how people can say people like the Phil Spencer and all them are just like oh my god they're amazing people, they're so good, and PlayStation are awful. It's like, did you not see their emails? I thought they're supposed to be a good guy, you know. Um, and this will probably lead to more exclusives on Xbox and PC, which I think is fine. Like that's totally fine for that makes sense as a business decision. I think that's good for I think exclusives are good. Maybe not Call of Duty and other things like that. I don't think buying exclusives is particularly great. Um, Even like I say, even PlayStation doing it, even though I think when PlayStation does it, makes a little bit more sense and isn't on this scale. Like how Xbox apparently bought Bethesda because PlayStation were going to potentially have exclusive rights to Starfield. They're like, oh, we'll just buy the studio, which is fair enough. It just seems like a long reach. I also think Bethesda makes sense as a purchase for them. In general, I think Activision's a bit of a strange purchase. Um, but yeah, Phil's presenting this as like bringing more games to everyone, and it's like, but yet you're probably going to make things exclusive. That's not bringing more games to everyone. So on the front, Phil and Xbox are making themselves look like they are here to like everyone plays games wherever they want to play games, And it's like that's not really what they mean. They mean wherever Game Pass exists, and that's been a lot of their rhetoric. A lot of the time, how they've spoken is always Game Pass, Game Pass this, Game Pass that. I will say this deal has probably been pretty satisfying for Phil and the rest of the leadership team to kind of get this finally done, and in that sense, considering how long this has been going on, they probably feel a lot of relief. I mean, it's not over yet for them, obviously, but they won probably the most difficult battle that they were going to have. So they must feel pretty good, and understandably so. And from that aspect, it's pretty almost it's an interesting story. It's just not interesting from the sort of scale it's on, and the amount of money being thrown around. Um, and yeah, it's just weird to me that people are like, people are fine. I think I wrote this down a bit further in my notes, but I think people think this is almost like sports. They treat it like sports, how like people are like, how you have like managers and stuff at teams buying football players and things like that. And they think it's like, they sort of treating this like that, as if it's like, oh yeah, it's really good, but I don't think people understand the potential like deleterious effects that this could have on the industry as it kind of works. It means you've got like, you think about the value of Microsoft and Xbox and the value of Activision, and now they are one, and the amount Activision bring in, it's a lot, and I don't know why that's like a thing to celebrate, because I'm like, don't we just want, we mainly want good games, and obviously that's hopefully what will come out of this, but it could be a bit concerning on some of the direction this goes in, and I don't think people are actually really thinking about that, or a lot of people aren't considering that much. And I'm seeing a lot of bias towards Xbox, like a lot of just like not just support, but it's like, oh, everyone, like people are celebrating kind of thing, and it's like, what are you celebrating? Like what are you like? Most people that are probably talking about this and discussing this aren't gonna really gain anything from this other than older Call of Duty games going on Game Pass. And it's like, are you really that against spending money on games that that's all you see in this? Like, that's the main thing. It's just like, oh, but if old Call of Duty games go on Game Pass, hooray! Like that's what this deal. But it's like, but this deal doesn't need to happen for that to be a thing. And a lot of these things that they've spoken about don't, don't need the deal to happen. Um, but yeah, just quickly in terms of that deal, not the deal, sorry, the hearing that was going on as well between the FTC and Microsoft. This is kind of the last thing I'll mention. Oh well, I say that there's a couple more things. We also talk a bit more game because there's some Game Pass news about some changes they're making there to the structure. I'll get into in a minute as well. Um, but in terms of that FTC v Microsoft hearing at the court, I do think the decision was a little bit strange. Now I don't know enough about the legal process and things like that, but I don't know if the FTC themselves or even the judge really knows games too well, and I'm sure they know things from a legal perspective. But there was some weird things coming out of that, and to be fair, in terms of the consolidation, when you talk about consolidation and mergers and acquisitions, that can be that is a legal thing, and so that is something that I'm sure they are perfectly knowledgeable about. I just don't know if they really consider it from the gaming industry, and they're not really looking at all the numbers and the whole data. Uh, for example, like the judge compared God of War and Call of Duty. I think it was something like the judge was saying that like, oh, if Call of Duty on goes on Game Pass, well then PlayStation could put God of War on Game Pass on PlayStation Plus, sorry, and like that's a way they'd combat it. I'm like, no, that's not how that works. That wouldn't make any sense, and I couldn't believe like when I saw that I was like, it's like how people say about like, oh, but PlayStation has all these exclusive and Final Fantasy, and it's like, but you're talking about Call of Duty here, like the one I don't want to say the biggest, but I'm pretty certain it's like the biggest franchise. It's confusing, honestly. Um, Now I just with all due respect, I just don't know if a decision being made by those who appear to not understand the industry very well. I just don't think that's a very good thing. You want these decisions being made by people that are really understanding what they're doing and the industry as a whole. But since this, I did learn that like apparently because judges are obviously meant to have a neutral standpoint, they have no bias. They're kind of that's what makes them. That's part of what they're doing is that they're going in and they're making a decision based on the information presented and the case given to them, and to give as neutral a standpoint as possible to um, you know, essentially, because their whole view is that like, oh, if this thing was good for consumers, then that's good, and obviously a lot of the Call of Duty going to Game Pass is obviously seen as a good consumer, or more games being brought to um, people across the board is seen as a good thing. But it's not really thinking about the actual industry. It's more thinking about, oh, this could be good for gamers, and it's like, yes, but what about the industry? The industry needs to exist and thrive for games and gamers to actually have those to have those games and have those experiences and to have this this Game Pass and everything like that. And but I can understand to some that like it might seem weird for like them to be neutral, but I think it does make sense. Like you need someone who is in a position to of neutrality to kind of avoid any potential biases. But I will say, when I say that, but what's strange is, and I don't know if this is true. I heard this in a couple of places, but I didn't see it picked up very much, which again doesn't surprise me because I feel like there was a lot of bias towards Xbox. I at least think that there should have been some digging into this, and maybe that is ongoing. But apparently, supposedly, the judge's son works at Microsoft. I find that very strange, considering there's meant to be a lack of bias, you know, and that is kind of the crux of my issue here is that there's such a bias towards Xbox and Microsoft and their approach to competition, rather than just like rather than using their money to kind of like build studios and foster them and grow them and build games. And sure, that takes time, but this should have been something they were working on years and years ago, back when the Xbox One kind of tanked, you know. But instead, they just bought entities, and you think 10 years on from Xbox One, they're in a better place, but they haven't really got that far. You think of a game like Redfall. I think Starfield will be the turning point, and I think they are. I've said before, but I think they're on an upswing now. But to think of where they were and 10 years on, they're not really that far beyond that, if you know what I mean. And again, it's not like Sony are no strangers to this, because, Sony have these third-party deals with Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy XVI, but at their core, most of what they've built upon are inherently PlayStation developers, and they've built up and fostered those studios and worked with them typically before they bought them. And that, sure, they are large and they make a lot of money and they've got a lot of power in that regard, and they've, that high budget, a lot of money being spent and thrown around this area, but it's all... It sort of feels like it's like, well, that didn't come out of nowhere. They didn't just... They weren't taking these, entities off the market necessarily. I mean, I guess they were, or they are, but it's not like they just randomly started pulling them to stop the other platform from getting those games. It feels like... And that's kind of what... that's what Xbox admit to doing with, with Bethesda, with Starfield and everything. And that's not what PlayStation do, or haven't done. They probably will start doing that now, because of this. So, bit of a rocky situation. I will say though, I keep bouncing back and forth from between like negative and positive for Xbox and stuff, but the one thing I will say is that I do really appreciate and like Xbox's candid nature. I like Phil Spencer. I actually, even though I disagree with a lot of stuff that he's doing, I still think he's probably almost one of my favorite people in the industry. Like just to listen to and just to kind of hear, talk and see up front there on a lot. But then I don't like it when he's up on the stage and being like, "Oh yeah, our biggest game, Starfield." I'm like, "Yeah, you knew the game that you that was in development way before you born." But I know it's me being picky there, but I do think Phil is pretty like candid and upfront, and to kind of be in his position and take a lot of the hits that he would have taken, which are hits that are fine, well, not fine, but like, I mean, they're kind of understandable considering how things have been. But, especially with games like Redfall, but at least he's out there, and he takes a lot of the fall. I mean, he did kind of, there was a bit where he sort of threw, well, I wouldn't say he necessarily fully threw Arcane under the bus, but he was kind of saying that Redfall was a bit, the issues there were deeper than they should have been, but he also acknowledged that they should have been more hands-on with that. And it's easy to say after the fact, but it's like, at least he's doing that. I don't see PlayStation doing this much. PlayStation seem very corporate now, and I much prefer Xbox's overall kind of interaction and celebration of games and involvement in the community, but it's that's allowed them to build up this goodwill, and it works, honestly. Of course it works, because it's like, despite everything, like, I'm still looking forward to Starfield. I am annoyed about this merger and all this stuff, and I don't like their approach, but it's like, goddamn, I can't... Starfield looks incredible, and so do some of their other games. Some of their other games are really cool as well. But that's what we want, though. We want those games looking good, and I do think that a deal like this Activision thing is not needed. Like, they've got enough games, they don't need this. I will say, though, and I'm gonna get to this in a little bit, I think, where is it? I've written something here. I don't want to break up the flow too much. It was something about mobile, because I was gonna sort of speculate on that, but I can't find where I wrote it. I'm sure I'll come across it in a minute, unless I've scrolled past it. Where is it? Man, I thought it would be... I might have scrolled past it. I swear I haven't. Because I'm going to talk about Game Pass in a minute. But, yes, no, it is here. Right, that was... I'm literally, like, scrolling past it, and it's, like, right where I was. Basically, right, so... In terms of just to kind of wrap up the Call of Duty and Activision, like Activision and that stuff, they obviously announced that they're bringing Call of Duty to a bunch of other platforms. They include like Nvidia's cloud streaming service or whatever. And I don't think that that's a bad thing, but I do wonder, like, what is the population of gamers actually playing these alternate platforms compared to PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, especially when it's all cloud based. And it's also like, why is it only Microsoft that can do that? Is that worth it? Because at the end of the day, you've got to think about this, right? Microsoft are promising all these things, but they're not things that would have necessarily happened or necessarily been worth it, because the leadership at Activision isn't going to be there after this deal, as far as I know. Like Bobby Kotick or Kotick or whatever, he's not going to be there. He's going to be gone, and it's going to be... I think they said that they're still going to work independently, but he's still going to be gone, as far as I understand. And so Microsoft will be controlling some of that leadership, or at least be part of that. So it's almost like, well, these decisions that Microsoft are saying they're going to do are not things that Activision might have done. Now, obviously, Activision are probably more money-driven, but that's obviously what all companies are money-driven. So what is the driver here? Are these drivers just because they want the game? They just want it. Yeah, but then it's like, but then you need teams to do this. Who's going to port it? Who's going to get it running? You've got all these other like things to kind of calculate, and I'm sure they've thought about that. But when you look at Xbox's track record recently, they should have thought about a lot of things, and that they haven't. So, yeah, I'm just saying, and it's it's a very much like the rich get richer situation, really, because Microsoft are then going to become bigger with Activision underneath them, and in a lot of ways that will probably make it more difficult for smaller developers to get noticed, like indie developers and things like that, and indie games to be sort of seen. I could be wrong. I'm sure some will still show up on Game Pass, but it's like, will this result in the entry requirements for Game Pass becoming higher because of the amount of money being thrown around, and because of the quality of games that are going on there and the budget being spent? Like, is that, are they going to have less budget to spend on these smaller games because they're instead funneling it into these bigger games? I mean, we don't know. And obviously, leading to what I was just going to mention about a minute ago, and this is where I'm going to sort of move on to Game Pass, is for big budget games to be put on the service, more revenue needs to be generated, right? And my kind of theory is that even though I don't like the deal, I'm like, well, maybe mobile is the focus. I know they've mentioned about mobile. I've not actually looked too much into their reasoning, but just speculating, I was kind of like, well, if mobile's their focus because of the revenue being generated by a lot of mobile games, I could almost imagine all of that revenue from mobile games to just be funneled straight into Game Pass games and to kind of support Game Pass, because in itself, Game Pass is just, I just do not believe it is sustainable. I think just fundamentally, when you do the math and you look at it all, it is not sustainable. It just doesn't make sense at all, like, just in any way. But I do think that, like, the thing is that the desire for content on Game Pass as well may lead to smaller budgets. And if the mobile revenue doesn't work out, but essentially, like, if it doesn't work out, whether through mobile or just in general, there's basically nothing to subsidize the service, like having these huge games, and so it could be a good thing having smaller budgets because you get shorter games. And I think a lot of people, including myself, actually think some games are just too big. Just in general, games are just becoming too big and too big budgets. But you don't want every game falling. The variety and the content and the scale of these games is a big part of that. But yeah, while we're on the topic of Game Pass here, there's a few more things to discuss around Game Pass in terms of recent news. So let's just talk about some changes that come into Game Pass that they've just recently announced, before I kind of dive further into my thoughts further onto Game Pass as the model. Essentially, this boils down to Xbox Live Gold, which currently lets you have monthly games and online multiplayer and whatever discounts on the Xbox store. They're renaming Xbox Live Gold, and it's being renamed and restructured to becoming Xbox Game Pass Core. And essentially, Core keeps many of the existing features, but takes away those monthly games, and it replaces them with a selection of titles from Game Pass, essentially. I've got a list of the games that they've announced so far coming here, and they said that the rest will be announced. So this service is all going to release on September 14th. I think they said September 1st is the last release of free games, with games with gold, I think. But they've said that additional games will be added to this Game Pass selection on Game Pass Core 2 to 3 times a year. And so this isn't the full list. I think they said there's going to be more than 25. I think it's just under 20 here. But the list that they've got so far of games includes Among Us, Descenders, Dishonored 2, Doom Eternal, Fable Anniversary, Fallout 4, Fallout 76, Forza Horizon 4, Gears 5, Grounded, Halo 5 Guardians, Halo Wars 2, Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, Human Fall Flat, Inside, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, Psychonauts 2, State of Decay 2, and The Elder Scrolls Online Tamriel Unlimited. I am actually curious now about Elder Scrolls Online, if that comes with all the DLCs or not. But much like it does right now, there's no change in terms of the cost. It's $9.99 a month or $59.99 a year. But instead of having those monthly games, it's going to have a permanent selection of titles, essentially. And obviously, this is clearly just to bring it more in line with Game Pass. But there is some confusion in this structure. So $9.99 a month for Game Pass Core gets you, as I said, that Game Pass games, selection of games, and online multiplayer. $10.99 a month is for Game Pass Console, which gets you the full suite of Game Pass, but no online multiplayer. PC is just the same as it is with Game Pass and everything, but then the $16.99 a month gets you Game Pass Ultimate as well as the online multiplayer. Game Pass Ultimate comes with online multiplayer, the discounts. I think it has EA Play on it as well, and the full suite of Game Pass. And it's weird. It's almost like, really, you should probably just bump everyone up to Game Pass Console and include multiplayer. But of course, Game Pass Core is for multiplayer and a selection of games. Game Pass Console is just for Game Pass. But then Game Pass Ultimate is both of those put together for $16.99. And so obviously that's the intent here, is to kind of be like, oh, if you want a wider selection of games and you want games more often, you go to Ultimate. And if you're on Game Pass Console and you want multiplayer, then you go to Ultimate, essentially. And so a lot of this is just the same as it is right now. But obviously, before you were getting monthly free games, now it'll be you're getting only a selection of games, and they'll be able to do 2 to 3 times a year. So every 4 months instead of every month, essentially. That might mean more games. Obviously, we don't know. I don't know if they mentioned, but that's whether games will rotate in and out of it or not. But it's a smart decision. But obviously, it's clearly to push people more towards Game Pass overall. They've obviously said that any games you've acquired with Games with Gold will obviously remain as long as you remember and things like that. And so, including back compat tiles. So but yeah, in terms of Game Pass and what I think, I do believe that Game Pass and Xbox can thrive, but I think it's if they reduce their commitment to the service a little bit. But obviously, they're instead further committing to it. And I say this just in that, like, services and subscriptions, I think, can be good for, like, older games, legacy titles and content. Or having just a selection of titles from first-party games. And I think if you did it right, you could release a new first-party game that's not on Game Pass. And if you present it well enough, people will buy it. But I think if they commit too much to the Game Pass model, it's going to become more and more difficult over time to pull away from that, which is then going to be a detriment to them in the future if that's something they want to do. And it might already be too late in a way. And maybe they don't want to, but again, I talk about that sustainability and the fact that if games budgets are getting more and more, which is what they've said themselves, Matt Booty said this, but it's like, if they're going to admit that themselves, then they certainly must know about to be able to keep these games, have high budgets going onto Game Pass, they're going to have to bring in money from somewhere else, which is obviously that's why I was saying about mobile. But what happens when those budgets keep getting bigger and bigger, if they do, and they need more? Are they going to buy more? We don't know. But that's why I say, but if they pull away now or soon, I think Starfield, sure, launch Starfield, but Starfield would have been an ideal candidate to be like, yep, this is not on Game Pass, but it's because it is such an impressive game that it's like, it's so good, and, but you'd have to do it in a certain way. I don't know how you could get away with it. You could still offer like a discount, like, oh, you're a Game Pass member, here's 20% off it, and you could start kind of reducing that over time, and you build it up over time, right? But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything for the news. Generally, as I said, I think Microsoft probably feeling pretty good right now, and it looks like this deal is going to go through. Who knows when it'll finish? Just hope that things aren't going to get crazy after this, because obviously there's the discussion of like, oh, who's PlayStation going to buy? Who's Xbox going to buy? And hopefully this is the last of these huge acquisitions, but a lot of people don't think it is, and I think rightfully so to believe that, My hope is that this leads to more competition, right? More competition just in general, but it's possible that it's just going to lead to more deals, and we're just going to get competition through who has the deepest pockets rather than competition through creativity, which is not really what you want, because this industry thrives on creativity, and that's where PlayStation have gotten this far with. PlayStation didn't buy their way to success, they built that success, through their studios. And Xbox are just trying to buy their way to success. Now, this could, like I said, this could just be the only acquisition they're going to make like this, and then they'll chill out. But they could go after someone else, And what I find even more frustrating is that I know if PlayStation buys someone, people are probably going to find that frustrating, and they're going to be, people are going to say, like, oh man, that's BS. But it's like, but you encouraged this, like, you supported the Xbox deal. This is what it's going to lead to. Like I said before, be careful what you wish for. And again, like I said earlier, it's like sports. I think people just think it's like, oh, who owns what? Who's going to buy? Who's bidding on this player and this company? And it's you can't compare. You can't treat it like sports. This ain't sports. It's totally different industries. Um, with a lot more nuance and creativity going on in the game side. Um, but yeah, that was a lot. I think I spent no surprise. I spent ages talking about that. Anytime I say I don't want to talk too long on something, I do. It's funny. That's just how it goes. Um, but yeah, let's to start wrapping up the show here. Let's just spend a few more minutes just talking about some upcoming releases and some other things I wanted to discuss before the end of the show. All right, so to kind of start wrapping this up, which I think I've just said, I actually again this is what I'm so I record these in different parts now. I thought of this random interjection of like um insight, but like I was originally recording these like as like one pretty much one part, and then if I wanted to, I'd like pause it, take a break, and then I'd sort of like carry on. But I kind of thought if suddenly something like news broke while I'm recording, I was like, well, the way because I'm using like the basic editor, it's really awkward to kind of like edit the audio files. So I was like, I should just record these in parts. So the news section, and so then if I record them like that, then I'm able to like easily kind of like splice in like, oh, let me just some extra news to talk about. So whenever I come back, like whenever I pause it and I like check something else, look where I'm up to, and then when I come back to recording, it probably sounds like I repeat my words a bit. So it sounds like that, and that's why. I should get better at trying to do that. It's also really warm in here as well. It's very fun. It's funny how the weather has recently been raining a lot, but then whenever I seem to record, it just gets really warm. It's like it knows, honestly. Uh, anyway, to kind of start wrapping up the show here, I've got two games I want to talk about and a Netflix show that I'm going to be talking about as before I kind of like end. To kind of be looking forward, looking at what I'm looking up to that's coming out soon, that's just been popped up recently. The first game is a game that I probably have heard of before, but I saw it about a week ago properly, and I've actually added them to my tweet notifications list, so I'm like constantly seeing when they tweet to kind of remind myself of it. Well, I say remind myself of it, but just interesting to see what's going on. There's it'd be nice to just know any news about it as well. But um, it comes out August 29th, and it's a game called Sea of Stars, which, according to their Twitter page, calls it a retro-inspired turn-based RPG. Um, and basically, I looked on their website, and they sort of mention a few of their inspirations, and they liken it. They say too many to kind of name or count, but a few obvious ones are like Super Mario RPG, Illusion of Gaia, and as they say, dare we say Chrono Trigger. So yeah, it's a really cool looking game. It's particularly the aesthetic that kind of caught me with this one and the lighting. And I seem to have a thing recently for, or over time, really liking pixel art and particularly like older looking games. I don't know why. It's almost like as I get older, I like older games. It's weird. But I find them just really endearing and they look really nice. And this one is no different to that. I mentioned before about playing. I mentioned earlier in the show about Mario RPG and things like that, and sort of being interested in like the older Final Fantasy games and playing Octopath Traveler earlier in the year as well. Um, but this one in particular, I'm really looking forward to. I think this is probably one I pick up. I think though the game I'm going to talk about afterwards is also releasing around this time, so it's not that great. But this looks like a chill game I can play maybe in between things. But there's currently a demo out for it on PC, Switch, and Xbox, and apparently PlayStation is getting this demo soon, so I guess that'll be my way of being able to sort of try it. But it's also one of those where I'm like, I don't know if I want to play a demo, I just kind of want to buy it and play it. I don't know how much it's going to cost, but yeah, I found that this is interesting, but the developer is Sabotage Studio, and that's the same team. It's the same team at that dev that made a game called The Messenger, which I've also heard is really good. And The Messenger was an action side-scroller platformer that was originally released in 2018 on PC and Switch, then later on PlayStation in 2019, and then on Xbox in 2020. And so I think this is their next game by the looks of things, which means they've been working on it like fully, I guess, for 5 years at this rate. If yeah, depending on how much work they did for the ports on PlayStation and Xbox. But yeah, I just it's honestly just one of those I've not really seen too much about, but it seems like it's very expansive. It's obviously like obviously an RPG and it's turn based, but they've got some interesting things in the combat. I think they have like you time your attacks well, and that gives you more damage. Or I don't know if that's like more like on the controls that you do that, or if that's just more like when you play them in the turns kind of thing. But you also like fishing and which of course anyone that knows me seems to have a long history and connection with fishing in games, primarily because of Final Fantasy 15. But it's just become a bit of a joke and a meme now. It's like any game with fishing, it's like, oh my god, it's got fishing. But it looks like it's got a lot of like you know, you have your main quest, and you got your combat, and you've got your side quests and your exploration, but then you have got things like fishing and, you know, exploration, as I said, and traversal and platforming and climbing in it. I don't know if it's like an open world or like what. I think maybe they've said it might, but I don't know if it's like, yeah, I guess it's not open world, but it's probably like how you would imagine a lot of like isometric games to be, um, where you have kind of like quite an open world, but it's almost like structured in levels, and you go from one area to the next. A bit like Final Fantasy 16, really, but obviously that's 3D and a bit more open and action oriented, whereas this is obviously isometric. But yeah, it just looks really cool, and this is one that I think I'll be looking at picking up, maybe at release, hopefully. And if I do, you can expect me to talk about it here as well. If this podcast still still exists by then, which hopefully it will. That's my intention. Yeah, and so the next game here is Armored Core VI, which they just released last week, a story trailer for the game. A very weird but kind of cool story trailer that sort of suggests a greater narrative at play. I'm curious to know how the story will be and how it's delivered comparatively to From Software's Souls games, because obviously I have no idea what the old Armored Core games were like, but the way that story is delivered in the Souls games and Elden Ring and Bloodborne and things like that is very. There's not many cutscenes unless it's like introducing a boss, and it's delivered a lot through lore and like what's going on, and some of the mystery and the way that this trailer is presented almost makes me wonder if that'll be similar here. But yeah, I this one, honestly, Armored Core, I'm not sure if I will be picking up. It feels like one that I want to try, but I'm also not sure because I'm not usually a huge fan of like vehicular-based combat or mech games. I mean, I've not really played any mech games. Zone of the Enders, I think, is kind of like that, which I bought, and many. Well, I bought it because it was on sale, and then, you know. But as with many games, I haven't played yet. But there are just a lot of games, you know. And so I'm curious about this. I'm sort of curious to know, one, from a From Software perspective of, you know, liking their games, but also what's this game like in comparison to that. You know, how different is this from the original? And that's something I am sort of really curious about. And I will say it's nice to see From Software doing this because it's different. And what's crazy is that they are just, I don't know what they're on over there, but they are putting out a lot of stuff. You know, they had Elden Ring. 2 years was Elden Ring last year? Hold on. Let's see if Elden Ring was. I think Elden Ring was last year, or was it the year before? Was it last year? It was last year, yes. But not only that, but it was that it came out last year, and then they announced in the same year that they announced Armored Core 6. I think that was the Game Awards at the end of the year, and then just recently, I think they announced they're doing DLC, or earlier on this year, I think they put out a tweet, which I was kind of thinking that'd be out soon, but it sounds like they're making one big DLC for the game, which maybe makes me wonder if that'll be next year or something that will come out, maybe shown at the Game Awards. If you hear that, there's a car going past outside, or a motorbike, I think it was. So I don't know if that actually came through or not. We'll find out. But yeah, and one other little side note, I like how the standard edition of this, or the launch edition, is coming with a few bonus items, I think, like art cards and stuff like that, and they did the same with Elden Ring, and I don't know if they did that with any other games, but I just like the fact that From Software or Bandai Namco just kind of like make their standard editions, their launch editions, a little bit more interesting. I remember this started when Witcher 3 with CD Projekt, they did with Witcher 3 came in like a slipcover and had like a compendium, sort of small compendium inside it and stuff, and some stickers and some, you know, just to kind of like make that standard edition feel a bit more premium. Same with Cyberpunk as well. And I'm actually seeing more and more games do this, I think. It's not all the time. I know that Dead Cells, I've actually got this pre-order because I think it's a really nice addition. Plus, I'd like to play Dead Cells at some point. They've obviously had their Return to Castlevania DLC, but they've got like a re-release of that with that DLC and a bunch of like physical collector's stuff coming with it. It's like pretty cheap and it's just like a nice little addition, honestly. So yeah, I like that. I like collector's stuff. So thumbs up there. As I said, not too sure about Armored Core if I'll check it out. It sounds interesting, sounds like something I might like, but I'm also, like I said, not a huge fan of mech or vehicular combat games. But we'll see. Well, I'm gonna see, wait till close to the time, maybe watch some gameplay and stuff like that. But next, just to kind of wrap up here, the trailer for the live action version of One Piece came out last week, or over the weekend, I think it was. And I actually think it looks pretty good, honestly. I know this is departing from games a little bit, but I was surprised. For context, I've only seen the first 20 or 30 episodes, I think, of the anime, and I actually quite enjoyed it. It's quite, just find it a chill, sort of quite interesting and relaxing thing to watch, honestly. Nothing too crazy and over the top. Um, but this trailer, there's a lot of stuff obviously I recognize from seeing those first few episodes, and a lot of Easter eggs. But I think what's really cool about this is that so many people are really, pleased with it, and hopefully that'll pan out when it releases. I think it's August 31st it comes out, if I remember correctly. I actually don't know if they're releasing all the episodes at once. I don't like it when Netflix releases all episodes at once. I wish they just released them one every week or every few days. I think that's always cool to kind of be able to look forward to the next episode, but whatever they'll do, I guess. And from my understanding, this has been in development for a while as well. I think it's been in development and production for at least a year, but I'm pretty certain it's been more like a year and a half and 2 years, or 2 years at this point. I could be wrong. Maybe that's too long. I don't know, but I have fairly high hopes for this. Honestly, I'm sort of like, as I said, I'm not like I'm a huge One Piece fan or anything, but I know a lot of people that are, and a lot of people seem to be quite excited for this. And even I think people that aren't One Piece fans are actually thinking that they lean into like the goofiness and the silliness of One Piece, which a lot of people were concerned about with live action, but it actually looks like they've done a decent job. Particularly, um, the clown character, Buggy, does like the thing where he's like in the air with all his body parts like separated, and he like attacks, and that actually looks alright. I was kind of surprised seeing that. I mean, it's been a while since I watched One Piece, so I sort of forgotten some of the things that are in it a little bit. But I was like, damn, that's actually good job, honestly. And I'm getting the sense they've really taken their time with it, and I hope that that continues. I hope that that pays off, kind of thing. I also think the actor, is it Inaki Godoy or whatever, who plays Luffy? I think great casting, and Kobe as well. I don't know the actor's name, but whoever they've got to play him, I think is just there's a lot of things that like they've done really well that just like you look at and go, wow, you've literally looked at the anime and gone, oh, like, the manga or whatever, and you've just gone, let's translate that across. And hopefully it all pans out. I think it looks pretty good. But yeah, that's basically it for this episode. This is actually way longer than I had planned. I thought this would be an hour and a half at most, but I think this is fine though. It's like I said, I think I'm fine with these episodes going a bit longer. They are the main shows of the week, so this is going to be over 2 hours, I think. So long podcast, honestly. That's the longest I've recorded, I think, for one particular episode. This is going to take ages to export, and probably won't be ready for 5 or 6, but hopefully I'll have it done today, and up today as well. Today being the Monday the 24th. If worst comes to worst, comes to Tuesday 25th, but then that's a sign that I just need to plan a little bit further ahead, but we're still further ahead. I'll have time to export and everything today and make the thumbnail, so yeah. So it's kind of, to sort of end here. Should probably shout out that again that you can check out the first episode of what I'm playing. I've got obviously a podcast playlist you can check out. That has both that first episode and the first What I'm Playing Plus episode, where I'm discussing my favorite backlog games of 2023 so far, and then the next What I'm Playing Plus episode, I'm aiming for this Friday on. I'm going to beat Final Fantasy 16, hopefully. Don't know if I'll do it tonight, but maybe tomorrow I'll get that done, and then maybe tomorrow or even Wednesday I'll record that and hopefully have that ready for Friday. Or if not, it'll be next week if worst comes to worst. But otherwise, I will be back with this main show in 2 weeks, with more gaming news and thoughts on whatever else has been going on. I should definitely have Final Fantasy 16 done by then. I also hopefully might be checking out Remnant 2 by then as well, so maybe I'll have that to talk about. And Pikmin 4, hopefully I'll check out. I've also just clicked my fingers, that was sudden. I don't know what else is going on. I also have the Blu-ray of The Last of Us, the HBO show, so that I would like to check out. Maybe I can kind of spin that up into something as well, watch an episode or two for next episode, and I'll see what happens. Lots of things that I want to check out. It's very busy despite the fact there's not that much coming out, there is a lot of stuff going on, really, in terms of games, or a lot of stuff I want to play anyway. And you know, I don't really know what, it's a bit up in the air what will be happening next time. But hey, we don't know. Not only is it up in the air for what I've been playing, but it'll be up in the air for what is going on news-wise. And we'll be into August then, which I believe Gamescom is soon, right? Gamescom soon, right? Hold on. Let's do another thing live. You might be able to hear me typing a little bit here. Gamescom 2023. It is 27th of August. Okay, of course, right? Again, it's that week. It's like that. The ending of August is like there's so many things going on that week. Oh wait, no. August 23rd to the 27th. So when will I be recording? This next episode should be on the 7th of August, then the 21st. Right, so Gamescom will be happening after that. I maybe I can do a What I'm Playing Plus episode or something then. I'll find out. We'll figure it out. Figure it out in time. For now, I'll leave it. If you have any comments, feedback, concerns, any thoughts, leave them in the comments below, and I'll get back to them either in replies or for the next episode. But for now, though, I appreciate you for listening and for tuning in. And yeah, I will see you next time. Have a good one, and ciao, ciao, ciao.